my stuff. I get my stuff my first, and once it's not around, I take a look at it.
Are you talking about the grain thing?
Yes.
Addicted to drugs, alcohol, or something else. That's another
I told her last night
manifestation
where
of
it was until she
the desire for constant ecstatic process without doing hard work through the entire grounded method. So again, these different beings affect us in different ways. And we got that going? Okay? Yes, you bet. So, back to our story already in progress. Now that we have a little bit of background, we can talk about a direct illustration of a Rosicrucian initiation school. Again, we have very little time tonight, so I just want to give you a general sense of this. Classically, as I mentioned, the Rosicrucian initiation system is based on individuals. They can work alone, they can work in small groups, whatever it is, but there's no central authority, there's no central institution. And so we tend not to have any real Rosicrucian initiation schools, etc. Again, there are different Rosicrucian organizations. They make varying levels of claim. But the classical impulse that you find with Rosicrucianism is very much that of what they call self-initiation. And the idea is that once you can awaken that I am inside through certain processes, then the task is to connect directly to Spirit and not have to do it through connecting through another human being that will then connect you to Spirit. And this is not a new idea. I mean, the original Buddhists were all about this. You know, Buddha was all about the direct connection, and then after Buddha died, to be honest, in some parts of Buddhism, a priesthood came in that said, well, we'll pray to Buddha for you, kind of thing. And this is kind of an old story. But the general idea is, no, we want to connect directly. So Rudolf Steiner, a remarkable teacher living in Austria, who, again, from my perspective, if you study his works, was really the most advanced Rosicrucian ever to teach publicly. It doesn't mean he was ever the most advanced Rosicrucian of all time, but he was the most advanced one that ever was like publicly out giving talks and doing these types of things. For those of you who know about the work of Rudolf Steiner, he lived from 1861 to 1925, and he left behind over 350 volumes of spiritual texts. And there's material in those 350 volumes that you won't find anywhere else in print, having to do with initiation teachings of different traditions over time. Some really deep stuff, really remarkable. You have to get a little bit of a foundation under your belt sometimes to understand what he's talking about in the more advanced works, like anything else. But it's amazing what's there. So Steiner himself actually ran an initiation school within Rosicrucianism from 1904 to 1914, mostly in Germany and Switzerland. And the people that joined this school were meant to go through a particular path of development. But because it's so individual in its nature, Steiner would give different exercises to different people, depending on their structure and what they're developing toward. And so they actually had 4 different pathways you could enter in on when you began. The first pathway was called the general discipline, and it was somewhat similar to classical Hindu or Buddhist types of approaches. The general discipline that he had in his school was things like you would meditate at certain times of the day. You do various types of self-observation. You would go through a very grounded day-to-day process of spiritual work, spiritual study, things of that kind. The other 3 paths were a bit more specialized. The first one is a path that is mostly for people that are in the thinking pole, in the head. And that was called the Pythagorean, or the intellectual or art pathway. For those of you that have a background in sacred geometry or the Pythagorean work, the Pythagorean school was one that taught types of science and art based on classical spiritual teachings, mostly from Egypt. Pythagoras was actually trained in Egypt and in Babylon. I'm not going into all the details of that, but the basic idea is that if you look at the Pythagorean work, it's all related to sacred geometry, sacred number, various types of patterns in the world, and hidden within it are secrets of things like resonance and harmonics. Resonance is the process with which whatever energy quality we're holding at whatever level, whether it's within our energy body, emotional body, mental body, etc., whatever that energy quality is will resonate like a tuning fork with other beings, processes, planes of the same nature. And harmonics is where that resonance doesn't only take place on the physical plane, it can take place across multiple octaves, expressed scientifically, but spiritually it means that that resonance can be between something here on the physical world and something in higher spiritual worlds. And so resonance and harmonics is all through the Pythagorean work. So a person on this pathway, they would definitely be studying things like sacred geometry. They'd be understanding the intellectual teachings. They'd be understanding the patterns of creation, and also working with them in art, directly expressing them, understanding them through doing to a certain extent. And so what this is meant to do is it illuminates the thinking. Again, not as just a type of intellectual activity, but to where the intellect develops to where it actually becomes clairvoyant. And so when we talk about something like sacred geometry forms, very commonly when we teach sacred geometry here at the Vesica Institute, the majority of the students that take the class will come to me later and say, I've seen these patterns before. I've seen them in my meditations. I saw this one in my dream. I worked with a teacher in the Himalayas who gave me this pattern, or something like this. The patterns are related to direct thought forms of the mind of God that hold pattern the way we discussed before. The second of these was known as the Christian Gnostic or a devotional path. And this was really a heart-based path. It was a path of devotion. And we'll talk a little bit more later on when we talk about different levels of initiation or paths of initiation. Well, this is really a heart-based path. It's about devotional study and prayer of the heart, things of that kind. So we can develop various centers of the three primary centers, and it's really a question of which one we're crystallizing first. Or we can take what was known as the karma path or the action path, and that was a path of the will. That was people that really just want to go out and do it. They want to do something, and it's through the actual movement and the activity that they get initiated to a higher level. Something wakes up in them from the actual doing. And an example within the Rosicrucian work were people that worked in biodynamic agriculture. So they actually worked in the world. They're working with the forces of the earth and they're transmuting it to a higher level. They're bringing the life forces back into the earth through doing. And of course this is also related to recent studies that have been done of human development and how our actual moving of the body is essential for the development of our thinking process and the brain and things like that. So that essentially there are many fields now of educational kinesiology and related fields in which they describe the way that a child moves and acts in a certain way in the first few years and lays down all the neural pathways for later in life. And the actual physical movements have to be there. So anyway, they understood there are 4 different pathways that could be taken. Now, as you're moving through a process of initiation, this process could take on different forms at different stages. And so depending on what tradition you're looking at what time, they would have different names for the stages of development. You go from one stage to the next stage. So in classical initiation in the West, they would go often and use these types of terms for the stage of the person, sometimes in veiled form. There's a wonderful book that we have here on the back table called The Burning Bush by Edward Ray Smith. Edward Ray Smith was a Methodist minister who began to realize there was a lot within the esoteric tradition that explained the stuff that he had studied in his Bible studies. He was a Bible scholar, he could read the Greek, he could read the Hebrew, all that sort of thing. But he realized that a literal interpretation of a lot of this doesn't really work, that they're actually referring to something that when you study the esoteric tradition, it perfectly fits into place. So in The Burning Bush, it's a wonderful work where he summarizes a lot of the terms used in the Old and New Testament and what they actually meant within the initiation traditions for the Essenes, things like that. That's in a very grounded way. So the first stage of initiation in the classical initiation was called the raven. And so you see pictures of ravens in some types of alchemical manuscripts. And if you study the Old Testament, you'll see that the story of the initiation of Elijah, they say that Elijah was fed by a raven in the wilderness. And so for anyone that was part of the Kabbalistic initiation system, they knew what that meant. They knew that he is at the stage of the raven at that point. Because the raven is a dark bird. It has to do with this dark element of the soul that is going to become illuminated through the process. The next stage is the occultist or the hidden scholar. And at that point, the person begins to actively study the spiritual realities behind the manifest world. At the next stage, they become known as the warrior. In the variant on this tradition that became the Christian guerrilla initiation in medieval times, this stage was called the knight. And the warrior stage was one in which one actually begins to work in the world for the goals and purposes one learns at these earlier stages. One becomes active working with it and applying it in the world. Next stage is that of the lion. There's some very interesting things in the early Holy Grail texts, like the book Parsival, describing the nature of the lion. A lot of it has to do actually with the transformation of the heart and of the illumination of the heart. As I mentioned to you before, the Rosicrucians describe the way that when our heart is of light from the etherized blood that moves up to the third eye and then illuminates the cave of Bra for higher clairvoyance. So we can develop forms of clairvoyance without the activity of the heart, but that form of clairvoyance can be very penetrating and cold. That's what black magicians develop. If we use the heart, though, we can move that clairvoyance to a much higher level. That's not just looking into people's weaknesses or how we can manipulate them, which can be done clairvoyantly, but actually looking into the soul nature of the person. What is the divine core of that person? Even if the person's acting out in a way that we can't stand them, we can try to look past that to see there's a divine core in this person, and we ask ourselves the Grail question of, brother or sister, what ails thee? You went through some type of suffering to be able to manifest yourself in this non-skillful way in the world that I find difficult to interact with. But it's based on suffering. That's why the Buddhists talk about, all life is suffering, everyone has suffered. The only way to get past anger and to forgive your and understand that your enemies suffer too. And so there's other aspects as well. 5. At this stage, you would have in classical text where a person is called so-and-so the Greek, so-and-so the Persian, so-and-so the Samaritan. And what's hidden behind that is that at this stage, the person is actually becoming a representative of their people, of their tribe, of their group. And so they can actually represent what is good in the cultural impulse of that entire group of people. And those are the kind of people you always wanted to lead your group in ancient times. And so it always used to be that the person that was the oldest and the most spiritually illuminated led the country. Then it became a big political thing, but in classical times that was the ideal. Then the 6th stage was that of the sun hero. The sun hero you find in many ancient texts described, and this is the point where the person is literally connecting to the forces of the sun. Now again, in early Christianity it was understood that the nature of the sun, S-U-N, and the sun, S-O-N, and the idea of the Christ is no different. Because the physical sun up in the sky as a manifest body in our solar system has the same relationship to the ocean of fire that is the Godhead as seeing the Godhead as a quote-unquote father has to him having a child that is a son. In other words, the sun up in the sky is an emanation at a more macrocosmic level from the unified Godhead. And so at the level of the sun hero, we are moving our consciousness up to what we would think of as Christ consciousness, transpersonal consciousness, beyond our people, beyond ourselves, beyond our people, to actually taking in the whole of humanity, until finally it moves up to the stage called in the Western terms later, the Father, which is the foundation of all creation. What the Buddhists talk about, all sentient beings. I will continue to incarnate to aid all sentient beings until they attain enlightenment. So this is the way it was described classically as the stages one goes through. And we can see that within this is really a way of depicting a transformation of consciousness from one level to the next. Now there are 7 Rosicrucian stages of higher knowledge. So I want to contrast these a little bit. They're connected, but they're seen a little bit differently as things change over time. The first stage in the Rosicrucian way is the study of spiritual science. Now there's something hidden here. Why is the first stage the study of spiritual science? Now we're not talking about something clairvoyant here. We're talking about literally studying spiritual text. First part of it is to develop our capacity to think logically. Now, in most spiritual circles today, in Western metaphysics, we look at things that are intellectual or logical as somehow lower than things that are spiritual. But that was not how it was understood in the original traditions. They understood the capacity to think logically as a superpower that would allow you to completely transform nature and to use all the forces of nature. And that's what it's done. We're harnessing the forces of nature more and more through the capacity to think logically. Also, the capacity to think logically allows us to become self-aware to a deeper level, and to guide our own lives. If you can't think logically, how can you act without a guru? You have to have a guru to tell you what to do, like when you're 1 year old and you need a parent to show you what direction to go. You have to be able to think logically and evaluate. So the study of spiritual science is connected to this, to actually get a framework. You have to have a context to understand things. If you don't have a context, you can't possibly evaluate what's going to be my best option to do in this situation. You have to know what your choices are and the whole context they fit in. But there's something else hidden behind it. And what's hidden behind it at the deeper level, when you take off one of the veils, is that the study of spiritual science allows you to put into your mind an understanding of a particular structure. Any pattern is related to sacred geometry. That pattern is related to the mind of God. So, as a practical matter, when you study spiritual science, you understand different levels of consciousness, different spiritual planes, different human subtle bodies, the evolution over great periods of time. Those actually put a structure in your consciousness that allow higher spiritual beings to tell you more. It's like if you had to run up on somebody and you're trained in physics and they're not, and you're going to tell them something that they can do that would really help people. You're going to have a hard time trying to find the words about, okay, now you got to do this and that, if they don't know the concepts. It's the same thing here. Higher spiritual beings can give us information about what we need to do with our lives to help other people, all kinds of great processes, if we have the core concepts to begin with that they can work with. Otherwise, it's really hard to communicate with us in a way that moves up to their level. So the study of spiritual science is to actually lay down contextual foundations in our thinking, in our mind, that these spiritual beings can then come in, and when we're meditating or we're relaxed, all of a sudden things start to click internally. We get these downloads that happen in a second. We're going to see how all these things fit together. Well, we can't have it without having the things planted in place first, without having the context first. So it's not just an intellectual thing. It lays the foundation for the spiritual beings to come and show us how it all fits together and how we can apply it. Second stage is called acquiring imaginative knowledge. This is referred to as imagination with a capital I by the Rosicrucians. At this stage, we begin to develop a clairvoyant perception that's related to the faculty of sight. So we can actually perceive things in the non-physical world in a way that is spiritually similar to in the physical world. If you say somebody is visual or auditory or kinesthetic, so one person primarily processes information through the eyes, they're visual, through the ears, they're auditory, through feeling, they're kinesthetic. The exact same thing is true spiritually. Some people will process the clairvoyance primarily through a type of internal sight, and they see all these images on their mental screen. A lot of those images are not actually present in the spiritual world, but they're how they clothe non-physical realities so they can access it and they can work with it. And so that's the imagination stage. We can now see non-physical realities in the mind's eye. We can't see with the physical eyes that there's an angelic being in front of us, but in the mind's eye we can begin to perceive that form. We might clothe it in different ways. If I'm a Tibetan, I might see it as a blue-skinned being above the floor with its radiance of light, etc. And if I'm a Christian, Jew, Muslim, I might see it as a great being of light with these huge wings, and maybe there's a higher hierarchy. Instead of 2 wings, it has 6 wings like the seraphim, or whatever it might be. But it's a way to represent seeing these non-physical forces. The next stage is reading the occult script. And without going into the depths of this, we can say that this is another type of clairvoyant perception that the Rosicrucians call inspiration with a capital I. This is a type of spiritual hearing. This is what is classically called basically hearing the tones of the universe, hearing these great cosmic symphonies around us all the time, hearing the symphony of the spheres. And so with this, we are able to understand higher realities through tones. So people that are musicians or really like music, you know that if you watch a movie, depending on the soundtrack, the exact same scene is a tragedy or a comedy. Depending on the sound, it tells you what the emotional content is. And the same thing is true here. Rather than seeing a visual image of a being, one would hear a tone coming from the being. And the tone would give you a quality of the being's internal nature. Everything tones and resounds musically in a great harmony. And we also, of course, do this all the time in our daily life when you hear somebody's voice. People's voices have a tone. That tone carries a part of their intrinsic spiritual nature. And then what is called living into the spiritual environment. And this is also known by the Rosicrucians as intuition with a capital I. This intuition is the ability to actually feel and interact with higher spiritual realities through how things feel internally. And so it's like a kinesthetic person. They have to feel something. They have to touch it. Now, this stage is something that actually allows us, you see that this is actually at a deeper stage than the imagination stage, seeing the image. Because as we go into higher and higher planes, we're going to have some of these levels drop away. And so to give you an example of that, as we go to what we call the astral plane is basically a realm of images. You see then with color and light. A higher plane past that, we primarily don't see things, but we hear the tones. At a higher plane closer to the Godhead beyond that, then we primarily can experience it through intuition. And with that, we actually feel the nature of the beings, the planes, etc., that we're connecting to. You have it as an internal knowledge inside of you. It's no longer outside, it's inside. Like they say in the Indian tradition, that art thou, you are that. You know internally the exact nature of the thing that you're connecting with. That is also connected with the idea that in higher realities, in the physical world, physical bodies are always separate. We can never fully interpenetrate. But in higher spiritual planes, that's not true. You can access what appears to be a spiritual being on a higher plane that appears to be one being. And then it begins to peel out, one being after another, out of the composite being. Because these beings can actually move into one composite being at a higher level. It's not like the physical plane. There's no physical separation. If they are the same resonant quality, they can become one composite being. An idea sometimes called combinescence. Then the next stage is knowledge of the relations between the macrocosm and the microcosm. Now we understand the way that the higher spiritual world and the physical world fit together. It's a continuum. They're not really separate. The astral world is not something out there. The astral world is all around and inside of us all the time. We begin to understand the way macrocosm and microcosm fit together. And then the next stage, we actually have a union with the macrocosm. We can connect to the higher macrocosmic forces. And this is related to higher stages of alchemy, some of the teachings you find in Taoist yoga, a lot of different traditions, when there's actually a union with the macrocosmic forces. And then the final stage is given different terminology in different texts. In one, they would refer to it as attaining blissfulness in God. Another would call it unifying the earlier stages. But essentially at this point of being able to unify with the macrocosm, there is not a separation of oneself from the Godhead. One can completely unify with the nature of the Godhead that's inside of our I Am presence. And this happens as a totality after the transformation of the other lower bodies. So this is the general sense of the 7 Rosicrucian stages. So that then leads to the question of, okay, from this really big picture of how things fit together, what does one actually do as a system of initiation practices? And you can find all types of Rosicrucian work where there are different types of practical applications of the work that they do. It might be hands-on healing. It might be working with the forces in the earth like biodynamics. It might be all kinds of things that are practical applications. But the practical applications all come from a certain type of internal development. And in fact, it's understood in Rosicrucianism and by the Sufis and by other groups that to train in such a way as to try to develop particular types of esoteric spiritual skills or abilities, if you have not developed the foundational transformation of consciousness, is something that's actually not helpful over time. It actually takes you in a very different path if you try to develop the skills rather than having transformed your consciousness to when those new occult powers come up naturally. They'll just develop on their own. So you can find teachers in the Himalayas, the Sufis, etc. They all teach this principle. Don't train for the power of doing. The thinking process. To illuminate Petersburg in Russia of himself, because now I can self-remember. What that means is I'm actually aware of myself at this moment. I'm aware of myself walking, I'm aware of myself talking, I'm aware of what I'm thinking and I'm feeling, and he's walking along and everything's great. And then he looks in a shop window and he sees something. And he says, and then I woke up 8 hours later at home. And we often have that experience. You know, we go out to do something, and all of a sudden we wake up and it's hours later, and I went out, I went to work, I went to the store and I bought groceries, I did this other thing, and I realized I've been completely unconscious the whole time. I'm just now becoming self-aware again. Sometimes if you look back on your childhood, there are whole parts of your childhood that most of us can't even remember. But there are parts you do remember. Those are the moments in which you were self-aware. That's why you remember them easily now, compared to those that you don't. So, Ouspensky then began to realize this entire process to where we're rarely completely conscious, and it's hard to stay self-aware. And he began to be aware of that threshold between being fully conscious and going to sleep. And that's absolutely critical. So that in our thinking process, it's like I've got my good spiritual persona on, and I'm open-hearted, and I'm dealing with everybody in a beneficial way, and good for me. And then something happens, and somebody speaks to me in a way that triggers some emotional response. And then I literally go unconscious, and I just respond to them reactively. And the goal is to start seeing that particular boundary point where I go unconscious and catching myself before I pass out. I stay conscious, I stay thinking, and I stay rational. And it's much harder to do than it sounds. And it's that much harder to do with the feeling and the willing, because those are already less conscious than our thinking is. But when we begin to see how much negative feeling we actually harbor about other people and all the things in the world, it's not a pretty picture. And then to see what we actually are doing in the world, this is a thing not only of what we are actually doing, we might do some things that when we begin to review it in a later exercise, we say, ooh, what I did with my will forces, what I actually did as an action with that person, it actually harmed them. I was almost fully unconscious at the time. Hey, it wasn't me, I wasn't even aware at the time. But nonetheless, it harmed them, the action that I took. But it's also sins of omission. So there are things that I could have done to help somebody. It would have taken me 60 seconds. I could have been somehow more conscious, I could have said something to them, I could have offered something to them, it would have helped them. And I missed it. And so it's a matter of really observing and illuminating these different aspects of ourselves and then stabilizing them. For the Rosicrucian teacher, people like Steiner, the first thing they look at is, are these things stable in a person? If a person does not have stable thinking, feeling, and willing, no higher development is possible. These things are the absolute foundation. Now, this doesn't mean that there's not a lot of more advanced work to do. Without this, there's no foundation to the building. The building will collapse. Then, of course, we have to start working on soul qualities to orient this the right way. So the next thing is to work on positivity. And Steiner used to like to give this illustration about a Persian legend of the Christ, where the Christ is walking down the road, and he and the disciples pass a dead dog, and the dog has been dead for days. There are maggots crawling in the dog, there are flies in his eyes, it's really grotesque. All the disciples like, ooh, and turn away, except for the Christ. He just keeps looking and walks by, and then after they pass it, he smiles and turns to the disciples, and in this Persian legend, he says, what beautiful teeth that animal had. You know, he's looking for the positivity in that. And so to always look for the positive, to keep that energy up, because what you'll find is that, we all know that positivity is important, but you'll actually find that it changes the vibrational quality of the subtle bodies in a way that changes your resonance with other beings. That has to be present to resonate with the beings that we're aiming for here. And openness. Openness is also sometimes referred to by the Rosicrucians as equanimity. And so this is being open to new information, new ways of seeing things. The Rosicrucians are really strong about not getting stuck in one way of seeing things. So everything that Rosicrucians teach is not dogmatic. Because if it's dogmatic, it's one perspective, and this is the only true perspective, and it's not seen that way here. The openness is to be able to see things from multiple perspectives, and the more perspectives you have, the closer you get to its reality. Like the blind men and the elephant. You're stuck with a spear and a pillar and whatever else until you see all the different perspectives and you know, hey, it's an elephant. By the same token here, this has to do with the particular soul capacity that Steiner refers to as being able to walk a circle around anything in our lives, around any subject. And in walking the circle, we need to see it from 12 different perspectives. And in a way, that's what the world religions are. They're walking a circle around a central reality and seeing it from different perspectives. Not one is right and one is wrong. It's walking the circle and seeing from an opposite perspective of yours, and you see more of the totality of what's held in the center. Now, it was also called equanimity because it has to do with not having emotional reaction to other ideas or things that come up. And so there's a certain stability that comes with this. We're open to things, but we also have a very stable internal soul life. We don't fall into reactivity. Because for anyone here that's done emotional process work, which is probably the majority of people here, you know that the reactive mind and reactivity is a thing that constantly brings us down. And the last part is simply to harmonize all this together, the harmony of all aspects. Because when you're not used to doing this, you've got to focus on one thing at a time. Okay, today I'm focusing on observing my thinking. Today I'm observing my feeling, etc. But once it's become second nature, all of this needs to flow into a complete totality that you don't even think about. This is the foundation in the background for doing the deeper work. So that's the 6 basic exercises. I just want to give you an idea of a few other of these practices as we come to an end here. Another practice was called the backward review. The backward review is very important to do at the end of every day. In Steiner's own initiation school, he made it a basic practice for everybody. What the backward review is, if you work with German Rosicrucians, they'll always use the term Rückschau. Rückschau just means backward review, basically, or to look backwards. Is that at the end of your day, as you're about to go to bed, the meditation to do is to intensively from that moment when you're about to go to bed, go backward through your day in reverse order. Now I'm at the moment just before I went to bed. Now I'm at the point where I went to the bathroom. Now I'm at the point where I watched TV. Now I'm at the point that I had dinner. Now I'm at the point that I'm driving home from work, etc. You go back through the day, all the way back to the point when you were last asleep. It might have been a nap. It might have been early that morning. And there's very deep spiritual processes behind this that I'm not going to get into all the details of now, but it relates to some very important energetic processes in a human being. Well, by going backward through that day until the last time that you woke up, what you're actually doing is you're becoming conscious of the activities of that day. So it's a part of this whole waking up process. There are all kinds of things laid inside of it. So one of the things is that by going backward, thinking backwards, we're actually developing a new strength, like we're flexing a muscle within our etheric life body. The etheric life body is our body of memory. And the etheric body holds all of our life forces. When we begin to exercise the capacity to think backwards instead of forwards the way we normally do, we're actually exercising something in the life body of memory that will become a force that can be used for higher initiation and alchemical purposes later on. But we'll stick with this for the moment. So we're moving backward and looking at that, we're developing this new force. But another thing that it can do is it can allow us to observe things that happen during the course of the day that we did not expect. So a corollary to this is that when we wake up from the nap or we wake up in the morning, we spend a moment before we get up in what we think is going to happen. Okay, I think I'm going to work, I'm going to meet so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. And I got a sense of general plan of the day. Now then, when you, at the end of the day, look backwards, you sometimes find that very different things happen than you had planned, or that things that were completely unexpected somehow inserted themselves. And what develops over time with this observation process is you begin to become aware of the spiritual beings and forces that came in at that time to bring something unexpected, something you didn't plan. And this is a very important adjunct to what's being taught in some metaphysical circles today about, create your day, and you control everything in your life. It really has got to be in a balanced format where there's a certain amount of what you create and a certain matter of openness for what Spirit can bring to us. So we don't try to rigidly control, no, I'm going to control every minute of my day. The spiritual forces are going to bring things in that we don't expect. And if we look back on our life history, if we did this back review for our entire lives, and we would find some of the most important things that happened with us, where we went to certain places, or we learned certain things, or we met a certain person that ended up changing our whole life, or we got married to, or whatever it was. These are things we never expected. We couldn't have planned. Something else brought us to that resonant point of intersection. We're not getting into it tonight, but a part of this also then links to the classical concept of receiving the conversation of the holy guardian angel. Guardian angel is the spiritual being that's the closest to us, and through this practice we begin to become more conscious of its activity with us every day. I could go on, but you get the idea of the backward review. Next, we have the observation of life forces, of growth and decay. Today we have this fantastic tool where we can use film equipment to literally see these Walt Disney films of a seed sprouting and then becoming a plant and blossoming and fruiting and withering away. And we can see in a moment what the Rosicrucians classically did through a process of observation that would take an entire year. They would watch every part of a growth process. For any of you that have children, you've done the exact same thing with your child. You saw every stage of the growth process of that child and how these forces then naturally unfolded in a particular way. Now, the observation of the life forces does something very significant, very important. and that is that it develops a particular type of clairvoyant faculty inside of us to see how things move through life processes from one stage to another. Because if we can begin to see that, first we observe it in the natural world, then we develop this as an internal capacity to do everything from understanding human spiritual evolution over time to, if we encounter a particular person, to see where they are on a process of crystallizing their I am self-awareness. Now this then leads to the concept of when we encounter any person in Rosicrucianism, the goal is to, when you encounter them, to see their archetype, to see their ideal self, their spiritual core, and where that spiritual core is going. We're all different. We're all like snowflakes. We're all made of frozen water in a sense, but we all have a different geometry. Significance of that is that we're developing different skill sets that when, as a new spiritual hierarchy ourselves, as a new angelic rank ourselves, we're just at the adolescent stage now, where we're like 21 and running around, we don't know what we're doing, but we're semi-mature, if we chose to act that way. We're in that stage of development where, as we move further down our lives, we'll end up developing certain sets of skills, understandings, knowledge. And so this is linked to the whole concept that over time, the things that cause us the most pain in life sometimes become the source of our greatest strengths. And so what we then begin to perceive in people is that there's been a trajectory of who they've been before and who they are now and who they're going to become. And this is what in Catholicism is called teleological destination, that we're moving toward a particular destination with ourselves, that there's a certain aspect of it that's universal for all human beings, the attainment of enlightenment, but it's going to be that we're going to crystallize in slightly different forms to do different things. And so this is a real divine mystery. Every human being holds this divine mystery, and to see what's held within it. It also leads us to actually perceive the hidden spirit and spiritual beings working through all the forces of nature. So, give you some idea of the observation of life forces and growth and decay. Then, of course, the study of spiritual science we talked about before is fundamental because we have to put down those concepts that allow us to logically understand how things fit together. Now, as we're studying things, we have a particular practice that we do. It's called the dissolving practice. The dissolving practice is an alchemical way to read spiritual text, so that if you're reading a text from any spiritual tradition, what you're actually reading as words on the page was the attempt of someone to crystallize into written language a direct spiritual experience that they had. The only way to get to the core of what they're trying to tell you without getting caught up in a fundamentalist literalist trap is to actually regain the experience they had they're trying to communicate through the words. That means the words have to be dissolved into a direct inner spiritual experience. And so it's a type of meditative reading. And this is very important. And it's part of a whole alchemical process that we go through in consciousness. So once we can dissolve the spiritual text into the original experience, it opens up a great world for us and is absolutely vital for going to deeper parts of spiritual teachings that have been preserved. Now this is also connected to the next stage, which is something called the Michaelic Yoga. And we're going to wind up here in just a second, but I think it's worth taking time to try to flesh out what is it that the Rosicrucians call Michaelic Yoga. What would be a yoga that you would do with the Archangel Michael? Who is the Archangel Michael? We mentioned before that the name Archangel Michael means who is as God. It is the being at the level of the archangelic hierarchy, which is a spiritual group of beings 2 stages above the human race at the current point. Humans, angels, archangels, archai, etc. The way we described in the classical Kabbalistic and Western teachings. All the Western tradition follows that particular model. That the Archangel Michael is the highest of the archangels. He has the same qualities as the Godhead for functioning at the archangelic level. And Archangel Michael is also known as the regent of the cosmic intelligence. That means the way that the Godhead sees the big picture for how things fit together, Archangel Michael has that capacity at the archangelic level. He sees how things fit together. If you go into the deeper waters of this, you find these medieval texts about the 7 archangels that guide different periods of time. 7 different archangels because they have a rulership of about 300 years each during each part of the Platonic cycle, where we move through the constellations. Each constellation we move through in the precession of the equinox takes 2,160 years. I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but let's just say that Michael is one of these archangels that helps to guide time. And he's the one that has the picture of how it all fits together. So this Michaelic yoga is a type of internal exercise that's related to the consciousness of Archangel Michael. Steiner describes it as talking about the way that initiation has changed over time. In earlier times, we would have a guru give us particular types of exercises, and they would guide and observe every part of our activity, because we couldn't make choices for ourselves. We don't have enough context. We don't know enough. We don't see enough. But now we're at the point that we're doing this for ourselves. So with this particular process, what we have is that in the ancient schools, they taught a particular type of breathing. And the way they breathed at that time was to actually make themselves more conscious by being conscious of the breath in and out. So there's a particular yoga of the inhale of the breath and of the exhale of the breath. And what Steiner is basically saying with the Michaelic yoga is that for the Rosicrucian, we have the same inhale and exhale, but now it's done in pure consciousness. It's not done with the breath per se. So when we inhale, in a sense, the observation of the physical world, then that's what we would call a perception. I perceive something in the physical world, whatever I see. I'm observing nature or a human being, whatever it is. I'm breathing in that perception. And that's a completely receptive activity. If I don't have a receptive soul, I can't do it. But we breathe that in, and we hold the perception inside of us. It might be the movement of a child. It might be the growth of a flower. It might be whatever it is. And then we breathe out the concept. A concept is where now I can see inside what I have perceived, the spirit inside of it. So when we say that, I have a concept about this or that, we tend to deal with the idea of a concept as something very intellectual and abstract. Oh, that's all just a bunch of concepts. But a true concept is a thought form from the mind of God. A true concept is a direct perception of spirit within matter. And that's why it's called a concept. The term conception means birth. And a concept is a birth inside of the human mind of the direct perception of spirit working in the world. And so instead of breathing in and breathing out, we're breathing in the perception of the world receptively, and then we're actively breathing out the concept, where now I have perceived the spirit in the world. This is extremely significant. So what I want to connect this with then is when we talked about this particular process where we made this movement of manifestation, there was this descent from the spiritual world. Clairvoyant became then a loss of clairvoyance, became more and more individual with our awareness, and pulled back up. There's a process here where all of creation goes through cycles of crystallization and dissolving. That's what alchemy is all about. Solver et coagula. It dissolves and it crystallizes. And so with this crystallization process, in time, it will dissolve again. Everything that has moved from spirit here into the physical world has the spirit within it, but in a sense it's trapped in matter. And many different traditions talk about this. And it's important for human beings because every being in the world has a function. If you study all the biological beings of the world, the worms, the animals, whatever it might be, they all perform a function in the world. They all have a quality in the world. And the human being is, in a sense, the crown of creation. We're the ones that have the fullest, most awakened microcosm of the macrocosm. But that's not a privilege, that's a responsibility. Because everything is consciousness, and everything comes from the consciousness of the mind of God. What this means is that when we can develop the mind of God inside of us, because it's now moved through the process of crystallizing into matter, our being able to do the Michaelic yoga, to breathe in the percept of the physicality and breathe out the concept of now seeing and recognizing the spirit within the matter, this actually performs the function that the Godhead performed of moving it from here to here. The activity of the human race moves it from here back to here. It's our activity of consciousness in perceiving the spirit in matter that links the mental concept that we have back to the mind of God and brings the ascent wave back up. Now, this is something I just want to say one other quick thing about, because we talk a lot today about ascension, and ascension is absolutely fundamental in spiritual development. But within Rosicrucianism, they have a very clear difference between what they call Luciferic ascension and Christic ascension, or it could also be called Michaelic ascension. And without spending much time on it, the upshot of it is that Luciferic ascension is basically the idea that I don't like to be here, and I'm going to get out of here as quickly as possible, and I'm going to basically deny the things of the world. I'm not going to continue to work with all the processes of the world or try to work in the normal processes of society, etc. And I'm just going to work on myself, and I'm going to try to separate and get out of here as quickly as possible. That's different from the Christic form of ascension, which is actually to go as deeply as possible into the experiences of the physical world, because by doing so, we develop strengths that we can't develop if we pull out too quickly. It's like if I tried to get a caterpillar that's in the cocoon and cut it out, I'm just going to have a mess. I'm not going to have a butterfly. There's a whole thing about going to the cocoon of the physical world and the experiences we have here that shape us. They are the alchemical experiences that we're meant to have here, the stuff we don't like going through. They actually shape us in a particular way. And so this Christic ascension is like the model scene with the life of Christ, that the Christ went through this entire process all the way to crucifixion, and then the descent into hell, and then resurrection, etc., as this model, this passion play, of going all the way down to complete union with the earth, and then coming back, and at that point basically said, I will be with you always until the end of days. And that is mirrored in other traditions like the Buddhists, where the Buddhists once again say things in the Bodhisattva vow, like, I will continue to incarnate until all sentient beings attain enlightenment. It's the exact same spiritual impulse. And so for us, it's the thing of grasping the nature of the physical world and working with it deeply and helping every being in the physical world and pulling it up on the pathway of ascension instead of saying, well, I'm out of here, good luck, and here I go. So this is the big overview of the general idea of a system of initiation within Rosicrucianism. And within this time, I've tried to give you a sense of the bigger context, as well as some of the actual practical exercises. And we are doing a workshop next weekend that is on this topic, working with the exercises and going into more detail on the context. And I'll open it up to any questions people have.
Would you please define concept again?
A concept, in the larger sense of it, is actually an ability for the mind to see a spiritual reality. It's the same thing as what in the Greek school, with the Platonists and the Pythagoreans, when they talked about seeing an ideal type, or seeing an idea, they understood that that was actually a direct perception either of spirit and matter, or a direct perception of the mind of God, at this very high spiritual archetypal level that every tradition talks about, but they call it different things, in which the pattern of everything is given in the mind of God. And so that's what we're actually doing. When we can think with true spiritual concepts, that becomes what the Rosicrucians call sense-free thinking, and it's also linked to a deeper aspect that we haven't gone into tonight of the new clairvoyance that the Rosicrucians talk about. And again, that connects us back up, because living thinking, true living thinking instead of dead thinking, living thinking connects us through that process with the mind of God itself, because it's all the same substance.
As I would perceive somebody doing acts maybe that I didn't like.
Yes.
However, I saw their soul.
Yes.
And that would be doing it.
Yes, it's directly connected to that Rosicrucian practice we mentioned, that when you see a person, you look for what inside of them is their spiritual core and their spiritual destination. What will this person become over great periods of time if their alchemical development continues on the right path? They're going to be something very, very special and unique. And to see the uniqueness of that, and also, again, as a way to deal with the less pleasant aspects they might be manifesting, to look at what type of suffering have they had, how do they suffer that has led them to act out in this way? Or how are they blinded or stuck in this purely reactive mind processes that keep them acting in this way? Was there... Yes, please. Luciferic path? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Huh?
You said well, he felt that was closed. I don't know if I was in his life. I know he's been many times. And he said in this time, he said, that it's not as general as it used to be. He said, I know because I'm not down that road now. And I just wondered if you agree with that.
My perspective...
Still monks and whatever, but he feels like it's not as open as it was.
I think he might be speaking about it in terms of a monastic path, that is a type of path of isolation from the world and this type of thing.
It's not as open as it was.
I think that's probably true. I think that that monastic path is not quite as open as it used to be. It is still something, though, that is open and can be done for particular alchemical periods of time, to create a sealed retort that one works within that's very closely contained, where all the forces are held in. Spending an entire lifetime in it, that would be a larger question if that would be really beneficial for a person or not. I wouldn't pass a final judgment on it. I would separate that concept, though, of the monastic path as a life path as being different from the luciferic pathway. The luciferic pathway is always open because any person that chooses to follow a life that is not well-grounded, or a spirituality that is kind of airy-fairy, not well-grounded, and doesn't really lead to something for them or somebody else, that's a luciferic pathway. Yes, please.
Is that you banging or them, babe?
Astrology natal chart can say what kind of initiate we are, or indicate what kind of initiate we are primarily, in what stage that our soul is in this incarnation?
To a particular degree. The natal chart, for people that are really good with astrology or Vedic palmistry or whatever method of reading these things are, they use the basic blueprint as a structure of the soul. But then they need to look into the individual to see how far they are along the path. Because a whole bunch of people might have been born at that exact same time, but they're actually on different levels in the path, despite being born at the same moment. But one thing that you get from a natal chart is that there's a kind of imprinting of the geometry of the heavens at the time of incarnation. It's all pure geometry. If you look at a natal chart, it's all an angular relationship of this body, which has a vibrational quality, to this body, that has a vibrational quality. When those two vibrational qualities are directly opposite, it's different than if they're at 45 degrees, etc. It's a real study of sacred geometry and cosmic influences on a human being. So it relates to the person's structure in all kinds of very deep ways. You would still need to use a kind of a vertical approach to get a sense of how far they along their particular pathway within that structure, because that could vary from one person to another who's born at that time. But one very important aspect of this is that we need to be aware that everybody's subtle body structures are a little bit different. So that we have certain structures in the subtle body that are universal. You know, we talk about the chakras, acupuncture meridians, etc. These are universal. But within that, there are other structures within the subtle bodies, within the life body, within the consciousness body, that are very different from person to person. Because every thought that you have, every feeling you have, every action you take actually sculpts the subtle bodies. That's how you become the person you become. And so one of the skills developed over time in this type of work or in sacred geometry work is to begin to recognize the different structures inside of people. And so for people that work as initiation teachers in different traditions, one of the major things that they do is they actually examine a person's structure, their psychological structure and their literal subtle body structures. They see what's been built there. And that'll tell them the current stage of the person's development and also what they need to do next. And in many cases, if the person who's doing the initiation work is very conscious as a teacher, they'll know that in many cases the person cannot do the same type of work the teacher does, because the teacher has crystallized themselves in a particular way, and this person doesn't have the structure for it. They have to actually do it a different way. I enjoyed it one time when I worked at the Clear Vision School in Australia, French medical doctor Samuel Sagan. A person asked him a question once of, how do you do this particular type of clairvoyant activity? And Sagan thought for a moment, and he replied, you really shouldn't ask me how I do it, because you can't do the way that I do it. I developed my capacity to do it a very long time ago, and you can't develop it the same way now. You'd ask me how I can develop it. And so, once we can see what people's structures are, that can be very important. My last thing here, and then I'm going to have to wind up for the night, is that this also becomes something when we do any type of meditative practice from any tradition, because most of us are on an independent spiritual path where we are self-initiating. We might train with different people, etc. Most of us don't have one guru that tells us everything to do. Because of that, we learn a lot of different practices, a lot of different meditations, and we have to choose which ones am I going to do on a regular basis, because those are going to change our destiny. choosing which ones to do. So at the end of the practices that we do here, I always have people check in for a minute before they come out of the practice. And I say, ask yourself the silent question, how has this practice structured my consciousness and my body of energy? And you need to check in anytime you do any practice and see what structures it's creating in you. You can actually feel something energetically beginning to form inside of yourself. Or you can feel your consciousness taking in a particular perspective by these things. And for one person, that particular set of practices might be great. For another, it might not be the most effective way for them to get to the goal that they're going toward. Okay, thank you all very much. We're going to have to wind it up here. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.
Hey, should be tricking her up here.
Go back down.
Every day for more than 40 years, celebrated American psychic Edgar Cayce would lie down, pray, and enter a trance-like state of altered consciousness. In this state, Cayce diagnosed illnesses in medical terms he knew nothing of awake. He described distant events as they were happening, talked of past lives and incarnations in the fabled Atlantis. He predicted the stock market crash of 1929, the fall of communism, and warned of cataclysmic earth changes that would send cities tumbling into the sea. Through thousands of his readings, as they are called, Edgar Cayce has become the most documented psychic of the 20th century. On a Sunday afternoon on March 18, 1877, Edgar Cayce was born here on a small farm 8 miles from the Christian county town of Hopkinsville, Kentucky. He was the second child of Leslie and Carrie Cayce, but the first to live. A daughter born 2 years earlier hadn't survived her first birthday. Edgar was particularly close with his grandparents, Sarah and Thomas Jefferson Cayce. On a hot summer day in June 1881, Edgar, age 4, witnessed his grandfather's tragic death. They had been riding horseback when they came upon this pond near the farm. Edgar was let down, and his grandfather rode in to cool the animal.
The horse was scared about something and threw the grandfather off. He had his foot caught in the stirrup and drowned before anybody could get there. And Edgar witnessed that. He was on the bank.
Edgar claimed he was visited often by his dead grandfather in a barn where the tobacco crops were fired. Edgar said he would tell him stories about the Civil War and let him stroke his chin whiskers. These stories brought ridicule from some, but Edgar's mother and grandmother wouldn't allow him to be ashamed of his ability to see what others did not. At the age of 7, Edgar began his schooling in this one-room schoolhouse. In his own words, he was a dull student, but then he found a book that interested him, a gift Bible from his parents. He began studying it and soon was inspired to read it once through for every year of his life.
You read it every day. You have to read it every day to go through the whole Bible in a year. And he went through that Bible at least 67 or 68 times, at least that many times that he read it. And how many of us can tell we've went through the Bible one time? Not a bad book to know about.
In May of 1890, at age 13, Edgar's life changed forever. Already a baptized member of the Disciples of Christ Church, Edgar visited his favorite retreat in the woods near his home to reread the story of Samson and the vision of Manoah. That night, after Edgar prayed for the ability to help his fellow man, he received a vision of his own. He wrote later, "A glorious light as the rising morning sun seemed to fill the whole room, and a figure appeared at the foot of my bed, an angel or what I knew not. Patiently it said, 'Thy prayers are heard, you will have your wish. Remain faithful, be true to yourself. Help the sick, the afflicted.'" The The next day, Edgar was in a daze at school, preoccupied with his vision. He was kept after class for repeatedly misspelling the word cabin. That night, his father tutored Edgar so late that the boy finally begged for a 5-minute break.
He just felt that if he could just sleep on that book for a few minutes, he would know it better. So his father, my grandfather, said, "All right, you try it, and I'll be back in 5 minutes." And about 5 minutes later, he came back, and Dad knew every word in the book, which page it was on. And from then on, he just began sleeping on his books, and he became a rather bright student from an average student.
How Edgar learned his lessons this way was a mystery. At the very least, he had developed some sort of photographic memory. He used this ability to land a job at a bookstore by memorizing their sales catalog cover to cover. In 1892, excitement swept Christian County. Former resident Adlai E. Stevenson was Grover Cleveland's running mate. A day before a victory celebration in Hopkinsville, Edgar received a schoolyard injury when a baseball struck his spine. Later that day, he behaved wildly in class, shrieking with laughter. On the way home, he stood in the street and stopped traffic. That night, Edgar mystified his parents by giving detailed instructions for an herb poultice to be applied to his spinal injury while he slept. In the morning, he remembered nothing of his accident or strange behavior. But now neighbors began to talk, including a local doctor, the father of a young girl Edgar was smitten with.
He led Edgar to believe that he was in danger of going insane, which seems to me the ultimate in cruelty for a doctor to say that to a boy.
Some believe Edgar's psychic powers had been triggered by these boyhood incidences. But before she died, Edgar's grandmother hinted that her husband had powers too, that he could move tables and chairs with his mind. But Edgar had little time to ponder these mysteries. In 1893, at age 16, he was forced to leave school after completing only 8 grades and go to work in the fields. His father, who preferred the lofty title, the Squire, was barely keeping the family from poverty.
My father remembered the Squire, and he said that he would always have a clean bib, clean shirt on and tie, and well shaven. And he would just look like he was worth $1 million, but he wasn't.
Soon the Cayce family quit the farm entirely to try their luck in town. They moved to this house in Hopkinsville. In 1895, when Edgar was 18, he fell in love with the prettiest young girl in town. Her name was Gertrude Evans.
She was patrician, he was a farm boy. It was an unlikely match. They were both people of faith, and they connected there. She saw in him idealism, beautiful idealism. She saw in him integrity, he was not phony. I think she saw in him adventure.
Edgar didn't wait long to ask for her hand in marriage, and Gertrude happily accepted. The wedding, however, would have to wait until Edgar found a better-paying job. In 1900, Edgar and his father began working as traveling insurance agents, but the business seemed doomed to fail. Edgar caught cold and suddenly lost his voice. Unable to pitch his product, he returned to Hopkinsville and took a job that didn't require him to speak: apprentice photographer. It was immediately clear in photographs of the town and of his favorite model, fiancée Gertrude, that Edgar had found a talent. But after 10 months of unsuccessful medical treatments, Cayce was still without his normal speaking voice. He had lost all hope for a cure.
He tried everything. None of the doctors seemed able to help him. And the hypnotist in town, hypnotism was kind of a fad then. And somebody suggested trying hypnotism.
Intrigued, Edgar arranged a meeting with a local hypnotist named Al Lane. He would never forget the date, March 31st, 1901.
It was on a Sunday afternoon, and that after church, and that Al Lane came out to the house on West 7th Street, and they went into the dining room and closed the doors.
Edgar was instructed on self-hypnosis and with surprising ease put himself to sleep. Lane gave him the hypnotic suggestion that he speak in a normal tone of voice. After a minute, he began to mumble. Then, to everyone's shock, Edgar said in a clear, unafflicted voice, "Yes, we can see the body."
And he described the condition that he had. There was a circulatory problem in his throat. And it was said that it could be corrected by suggestion.
Cayce was given the hypnotic suggestion that his circulation returned to normal. After a moment, he sat up and spat blood.
I don't say he was cured, but he was better at that respect. And cousin Sarah, who I talked to before she died, that was Edgar's sister, youngest sister, said that they would not let her in the room, but she peeked through the keyhole and saw it happen.
Edgar was elated, but not for long. His throat ailment, called aphonia, returned several times over the next year. Each time, Lane would conduct the reading, as he called it, and restore Edgar's voice. Lane, a mail-order osteopath, began to wonder if Edgar could diagnose other patients' ailments as well. He convinced Cayce to try.
So it was Al Lane who pushed him to do this, pretty much against Edgar's will. Edgar didn't really feel comfortable doing that because he didn't understand it.
While in his altered state, Edgar described illnesses in precise medical terms, in language he knew nothing about in his waking state. Detailed remedies followed.
Sometimes he would call a prescription by name. I mean, take bromoquinine, or take castor oil, or whatever it was that he was using.
But these strange powers and their implications terrified Cayce. He had never studied medicine. He was no doctor and wondered what right he had to act like one. More and more he wanted out.
Who wouldn't say, "I don't want this junk. It's too weird. It's too heavy. I don't want to see all this stuff or feel this kind of stuff or feel responsible for it."
When a job opened up at a bookstore in Bowling Green, 30 miles from home, Edgar jumped at the chance. There he joined the nearby church and began teaching Sunday school, something he had done since his early teens. At 22, there was only one thing he missed back in Hopkinsville: his bride-to-be. In June of 1903, after a 6-year engagement, Edgar Cayce and Gertrude Evans married. Cayce had begun his own photo studio in Bowling Green. He and his bride welcomed the escape from his reputation back home as a psychic doctor.
He didn't know how he did it. He just knew that he was able to do it, and he wanted to use it to help people.
But Bowling Green soon learned about Cayce's abilities, and he could not say no to the needy. The readings resumed, and in the autumn of 1906, Edgar, then 29, was asked to demonstrate his trance diagnoses before local doctors.
They came first thinking, I'll expose this guy. I'll see through him. You could see the condescension in their faces.
"Yes, we have the body," Edgar declared as he would by routine at the beginning of every reading. He correctly diagnosed a college student's attack of typhoid fever. Then, unexpectedly, some of the doctors tested Edgar's trance state by sticking needles into his hands and feet, certain he was a fake. Cayce never flinched or bled, but when he awoke, he vowed angrily never again to be anyone's experiment.
Slowly he began to learn that there weren't that many who really cared. A lot of people wanted to use him. Not many wanted to listen.
Edgar's safe haven had always been the church. Now he wondered, as did his fellow churchgoers, whether his gift was a blessing or a curse.
Evidently, some of the people in the congregation really got upset. That thought that this character was teaching Sunday school to their children on Sunday morning.
Edgar was accused of the church's worst offense, heresy. Though he was later declared innocent, it was a painful experience for Cayce. In response, he worked harder than ever, adding a second studio and taking on consignment $40,000 worth of art from New York. Business was so good that Edgar and Gertrude planned on building their own home with the profits. Then, disaster struck. 2 days before Christmas 1906, fire destroyed the studio. The unsold New York artwork would plunge Edgar $8,000 in debt. Incredibly, another fire would strike his second studio within the year. Edgar needed some good fortune. It came in a 9.5-pound bundle. Hugh Lynn Cayce was born in March of 1907. Edgar, the new father, eventually paid all his debts, but was forced to move in with Gertrude's disappointed family back in Hopkinsville. There, his father introduced him to homeopathic practitioner Dr. Wesley Ketchum.
Ketchum was pretty much a promoter, and he wrote a paper that was read at a big clinical medical society in Boston. The New York Times covered this and gave Edgar a full-page treatment, which is hard to imagine these days.
The Times article, trumpeting Cayce as an illiterate, was widely read. Soon, over 10,000 letters requesting readings were sent to Edgar by the chronically ill or those who had lost hope with conventional doctors. Many sent money, though Cayce had never charged for a reading before.
Edgar knew that he didn't do it. It came through him, and it was a gift that could come through him. I think that's the reason his ability was so good, because he didn't have concern of making money on it. It was really pure to help other people.
Ketchum offered to finance a photo studio in return for Edgar's readings. The time had arrived to decide how to use these powers. After a sleepless night, Edgar agreed, but on his own terms. His father would conduct the readings, and a stenographer record them for later review. And the money, nearly $2,000, would be sent back until services were rendered. Edgar's course was set.
I noticed on one occasion, he said, some people ask me whether I'm a spiritualist or whether I'm a medium. And he said, I guess the term for me is a psychic, but I really think of myself as a man of God.
Cayce settled into a routine of giving 2 readings a day, lasting approximately 45 minutes each.
It wasn't anything weird, as a lot of people would think. Dad would simply lie down on a couch or bed. He had a couch in his office. If he had a tie on, he would loosen his tie, then just cross his hands over his stomach and just lay back and relax.
When Edgar's eyelids began to flutter, the conductor, Edgar's father, and Gertrude in later years would know Edgar was in trance. The suggestion was then given, the name of the person and where they would be at the time of the reading.
Now, the person could be in the room, or he could be in another state or another city. It didn't matter. I remember one time he had a reading on a man who was supposed to be in an apartment in New York. Dad lay there a minute and said, we do not have the body. He said, he's not here. He said, he's on a bus coming across town. He said, there was a traffic accident. The bus is late. He said, he'll be here in a minute. We'll wait. And all of a sudden, he said, he's come in now.
A call to the man in New York later verified everything Cayce had said.
Now, there's a beautiful piece of clairvoyance, something that somebody couldn't have anticipated that would, seems to me, point to the accuracy of his reading.
From his sleep state, Cayce demonstrated a remarkable knowledge of anatomy, as if he were looking right into the patient's body. To the continual surprise of doctors called in later for second opinions, Cayce would pinpoint the problem, say a blood disorder resulting in anemia, and then offer a remedy. Most were home or herbal concoctions and included diet restrictions as well. When Edgar discovered that some patients weren't fully following his often detailed remedies, he began to envision a hospital with supervised care. It would become his obsession. By the spring of 1911, the future was looking bright for Cayce and family. A second son, Milton Porter, was born at this home in Hopkinsville. But Milton developed severe whooping cough and colitis. Edgar gave a reading, but the child could not be saved. Milton Cayce died in his second month.
The son that did not survive was a shock. And Gertrude's illness followed. She had, I suppose we would call postpartum depression and more.
Gertrude was a woman of beauty and strength, but the death of her infant son shook her to the core. Her health declined, and she developed tuberculosis, which had killed her brother. After doctors gave her a week to live, she appealed to Edgar for a reading.
And Edgar did it, but he was scared to death because this was the person he loved most, and he was scared that he might say something that would be fatal. Turned out just the opposite. And he says that really was the turning point. From then on, he said, if that could happen for the one he loved most, then it might mean that that's what he was supposed to be doing.
Gertrude fully recovered, her health monitored by what Edgar called check readings. But his newfound faith was betrayed by, of all people, his own father and Dr. Ketchum. When Edgar and Trance asked any questions, as he always would, they began to ask for tips on the commodities market and even on horse races.
He began to discover that they were playing games with him. He became very angry, and he terminated his relationship with them and even left town.
His father's betrayal would take years to reconcile. Selma, Alabama offered refuge for the Cayces, and Edgar opened a new studio, the Cayce Art Company. But his unusual powers would once again be needed by 6-year-old son Hugh Lynn.
It wasn't until my brother dropped a match in a partially filled can of flashlight powder and burned his eyes real badly, and the doctor said he'd never see again, and that's when he started giving readings again.
After doctors insisted that one of Hugh Lynn's badly burned eyes be removed, Edgar gave a reading. A seemingly dangerous remedy of a tannic acid solution saved his son's sight. The Cayces welcomed another son, Edgar Evans, in 1918, as the First World War raged in Europe. Edgar had seen many of his former Sunday school pupils go off to fight. Now 40, he was beginning to feel old, but his dream of building a hospital seemed more urgent than ever.
At the end of World War I, this was kicked him into the whole hospital venture. He discovered that his readings could outline treatments for shell-shock veterans, and nobody else knew what to do with them. There were a lot of them, and those who followed his instructions got better.
When a young Kentucky friend, David Kahn, returned safely from the trenches in France, he asked Edgar to consider something he had never agreed to before, to use his psychic abilities to raise money for the hospital. Coincidentally, Cayce had just received a request from a Texas newspaperman for readings on oil prospects. Edgar Cayce's life was about to take a most dramatic turn. In 1920, Edgar Cayce and friend David Kahn had visions of making millions as wildcatters, with their oil profits funding Edgar's dream hospital project. But these would be some of the toughest years of Cayce's life.
Well, I often think of his 3 years in Texas as his wilderness experience. I think he was wandering around in the wilderness.
The Cayce Petroleum Company was founded in San Saba, and drilling began on oil leases Edgar had recommended in his readings. But the oil never came. Months turned into years, and it got so grim that Edgar's associates started wearing guns when some of the wells were sabotaged by cutthroat competitors. Cayce came to the sobering realization that his psychic powers had become unreliable. They had dramatically failed him, and turned the noble mission to finance his hospital into a colossal defeat. Absent for 3 long years, some would claim Edgar had failed his family as well.
Certainly to put my grandfather on a pedestal as someone without human frailties or someone that had all-knowing abilities and never make mistakes with his readings, that was not the Edgar Cayce that I have come to understand.
Cayce refused to return empty-handed. He crisscrossed the country searching for money and finally raised a pledge for $60,000 for the hospital to be built in Birmingham, Alabama. But by now, Cayce's readings had indicated that the hospital must be built in the obscure resort town of Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Well, he said that the ocean had a good effect some way on his psychic abilities, or in any psychic, that it was a good place for him to be.
The Birmingham offer was promptly withdrawn. Beaten, Edgar finally rejoined his family in Selma. He returned to what he knew, photography, teaching Sunday school, and tried to forget his fundraising failures. But this peaceful routine ended abruptly. In 1923, after meeting an Ohio businessman and potential hospital investor, Edgar uprooted his family once again and moved to Dayton, Ohio. It was yet another gamble, as it was for an 18-year-old Selma native who felt her destiny belonged with the Cayces. She was Edgar's new stenographer. Her name was Gladys Davis.
Gladys was kind of like one of the family, and she had a phenomenal memory. She could, like a computer, she could tell you who had a reading on what date and what it was about.
In Dayton, Cayce underwent a radical change. During a reading for his potential investor, Edgar was asked deep metaphysical questions about the nature of the human soul. Cayce, in trance, began to talk of his questioner's past lives.
Well, this really blew Edgar over, because this ran counter not only to what he believed, he said, as a Christian, but what he taught as a Sunday school teacher.
Edgar knew the Gospels well and wondered why the Bible never mentioned reincarnation, if indeed it was real. Cayce began to study the Scriptures in a new context.
And he said it soon became evident to him that there were places in the Bible which, if you read them and read them carefully, you could see that they supported the idea of reincarnation.
Cayce's readings on past lives became known as life readings, as opposed to the physical readings he previously had been giving.
And so he started giving readings for everybody in his family, and they'd all had past lives according to his readings. And many of their lives, they were together in some other place, ancient Egypt primarily.
Edgar began studying other beliefs, from Hinduism to the religions of ancient Egypt and Greece. He would withhold judgment on reincarnation for some years. It was, after all, unprovable. But Cayce wondered whether his readings on past lives could be just as accurate as one of his physical readings, which he and others were able to verify. With so many questions at hand, Cayce's future seemed inescapable. In 1923, at 46, he became a full-time psychic, a vocational choice that few understood, many ridiculed, and added little to his bank account.
He wasn't a very good money handler himself. I mean, the money would go through his hands just like sand on the beach. He would cause Mother a lot of problems sometimes.
Gertrude, who had come from money back in Kentucky, would struggle her whole life with her husband's financial woes. When the Dayton money source dried up, she was worn out. She felt no reason to be optimistic when a new financial angel emerged. Morton Blumenthal and his brother Edwin ran a successful Wall Street brokerage firm. After an introduction from David Kahn, Morton became an instant Cayce supporter. He offered to fund the Virginia Beach Hospital and buy the Cayces a home near the beach. It was almost too good to be true.
It seemed like a little fishing village when we first came to the beach. It didn't look like, what Dad said it was going to be, a thriving community.
Edgar and family settled on 35th Street. The next summer, construction began on the Cayce Hospital, and the sleepy town began to buzz about this curious new enterprise. In partnership with the Blumenthals, Edgar began a corporation, the Association of National Investigators. Science, education, health, and spiritual awakening were the stated pursuits. This activity proved a tonic for Edgar. He had just returned from the Hopkinsville funeral of his beloved mother, Carrie. Edgar's father, alone now and past errors forgiven, came to live with his son. In November of 1928, Edgar's dream became reality. The Cayce Hospital, the only institution of its kind in the world where physical ills would be diagnosed via psychic revelation, was dedicated. It had been a long and difficult road for Edgar Cayce. Here was all he dreamed and desired, or so it seemed. In early 1929, after years of hard work, Edgar Cayce saw his hospital accept its first patient. Headed by his friend from Kentucky, Dr. Thomas House, it featured the latest in osteopathic equipment and massage technique, homeopathic remedies, and a low-fat diet. Cayce's readings began to suggest treatments with low levels of electricity applied to the body, something chiropractic patients today would be familiar with.
Dad said one day they would be able to take a drop of blood and diagnose the condition of the human body. At the time he said it, it was ridiculous, but now it's a normal procedure.
Edgar proudly noted that the building and grounds, complete with gardens and a tennis court, felt more like a large home than a hospital. Cayce had survived all the skeptics that called him a fake, a charlatan, and a heretic. Here was his triumph. Life in Virginia Beach was rich, and during the warm summers, magical.
Everybody at the beach used to call him Doc because they thought he was a doctor. But he liked to garden, he liked to fish. All these sand dunes up here.
Bluetooth connected.
With grapevines, so Dad used to go out, and we used to go out and pick grapes, and he'd make grape jelly and wine from them. He was a very ordinary person when he was awake. It was just those 30 or 40 minutes when he was asleep that he was unusual.
During his trips to Virginia Beach, Morton Blumenthal stayed at the newly completed Cavalier Hotel. He had budgeted $3,000 a month to run the hospital after an initial investment of over $100,000. As long as he was informed beforehand, Cayce had come to accept financial questions during his readings. On April 6, 1929, Blumenthal sought advice on the booming stock market. Cayce warned, there must surely come a break where it would be panic in the money centers. The reading proved prophetic. 6 months later, the market crashed. Against the background of the Great Depression came the unthinkable. The hospital failed less than 3 years after it opened. A biographer would later write that Edgar, devastated, wandered the empty corridors collecting keepsakes, including a photograph of his mother.
It was a real blow. It was, we had moved to the beach, the hospital had been built, it was operating, people were getting well, then all of a sudden it was down to where he started from.
If Edgar Cayce had a weakness, it was his inability to say no. As manager of the hospital, he approved extravagant expenditures, free treatments and meals for his staff and friends. He wanted to please everyone, make time for anyone who asked for it. But this weakness was also part of his gift.
His home, his privacy was invaded constantly. People would knock on his door at all hours of the day and night. And they had to be gracious to all of the visitors, and they were.
He could mark people with the genius of their lives if they let him. Wide awake. Talk with them, get hold of them. They go away marked for good.
The popular story was that the misfortunes on Wall Street ruined the Blumenthals. The evidence suggests they emerged unscathed. Some believe the hospital closure came after a power struggle between Morton and Edwin Blumenthal and David Kahn over who had primary access to Edgar's unique abilities. When Kahn won, the Blumenthals pulled out. Later, Edgar wrote with characteristic goodwill, "I blame no one else but myself for its failure."
The readings were kind of few and far between, and after that, it was tough times.
David Kahn made a fortune in the furniture business, thanks in part to Edgar's readings. The Blumenthals and Cayce never spoke again. Edgar walked away from his hospital flat broke. Later that year, 1931, Cayce rallied. He called a meeting of his closest supporters, like-minded people who believed in his work. He began a new organization, the Non-Profit Association for Research and Enlightenment. Readings would be given free to those unable to pay, and Edgar would receive an annual salary. During a fundraising trip to New York, Edgar gave a reading to a woman who had claimed to be in desperate need. The woman and her companion turned out to be policewomen, and Edgar, Gertrude, and Gladys Davis were arrested for fortune-telling. 31 years earlier, back in Hopkinsville, Edgar had feared that his powers might lead him down the wrong path. Now they had, and he was headed to jail, much to the delight of the tabloid press.
They took a picture of Dad and took a picture of all three of them, and they cut Mother out of the picture and said, "Psychic arrested in motel with blonde secretary." Really great headline.
The New York case was thin. The policewoman had signed a release and had not been solicited. The charges were dismissed. But in 1935 in Detroit, Edgar was found guilty for practicing medicine without a license. Though he was freed on probation with no sentence or fine imposed, Cayce was mortified. Soon after returning from Detroit, Edgar had a dream of reincarnating in Nebraska in the year 2100. In the dream, he finds that his works as Edgar Cayce are still known.
It came to him at a time when he was feeling very distraught. He was wondering whether his work was really of value, whether it would continue. And so this dream really served as a source of encouragement for him.
Cayce's readings, which were expanding in detail and scope, were also encouraging. He began to describe as best he could the journey his consciousness would take when in trance.
He would describe moving up through a beam of light, passing images and sounds, and his consciousness moving to other dimensions that are related to vast sources of information.
Cayce called this source of information the Akashic Record, where every thought, sound, or event from the beginning of time is recorded. He believed he could access this resource, as well as his subject's subconscious mind, telepathically, to answer any question posed to him. The concept boggled the mind, then as now.
That this man would lie down on a couch and essentially go to sleep and come up with this information, it's just too big a jump for
What'd you do, little beauty?
Of scientists and trained medical professionals today.
Edgar's personal life readings indicated 17 different incarnations as a high priest in Egypt, a nomadic ruler in Persia, and in the fabled Atlantis, which he mentioned nearly 700 times. He described a highly advanced society that collapsed over a span of 40,000 years, with its survivors settling partly in Egypt. Cayce, nearing 60, seemed to sense his time was limited. Readings of past, present, and future were now spilling out. By the mid-1930s, Edgar Cayce had gained a loyal following as a gifted psychic. Skeptics could say he made the whole thing up, but the hundreds of verified physical readings were difficult to dispute. He was right about the crash of 29. And in 1935 predicted the Japanese would join Germany and Austria as a world threat, a bizarre idea at the time. But some readings were so astonishing that even supporters had difficulty grasping them. Cayce said the Earth's poles would shift in 1936, resulting in massive geological changes. Cayce predicted flooding would destroy cities on both coasts of North America, and new land, the sunken remnants of Atlantis, would dramatically appear off Florida by 1969.
The stuff about Atlantis is hard to verify, and it's possible that his mind slipped, that he didn't have a good filter.
I don't think this was an area of Edgar Cayce's readings that was especially fruitful or especially accurate.
Cayce had no apology for the limits of his psychic ability, why he was accurate in one instance and not in another. Though he continued to make world predictions, he never considered himself a prophet.
I don't think he was a prophet as such. I mean, he did make statements about the future, but he always said the future is not fixed. You know, we can change it.
By the early 1940s, Edgar and Gertrude had settled into a comfortable home on Lake Holly, which doubled as headquarters for the ARE, Edgar's Association for Research and Enlightenment. This is the only motion picture footage that exists of Edgar Cayce, happily playing host during the 1943 ARE membership meeting. Though thousands of Cayce's readings were transcribed, only one audio recording survives. In a reading on his own health, Cayce, a lifelong smoker, is asked if he should cut down on his smoking.
Any stimuli to expect is and moderation. Moderation would mean for this body anywhere from 3 to 6 to 8 smokes a day. Above this will be expected.
Cayce's own health would suffer not only from smoking, but from giving too many readings. For most of his adult years, Edgar gave 2 readings a day. That all changed with the publication of a Cayce biography by Thomas Shagru, a friend of Cayce's son Hugh Lynn. It was titled, There is a River, from Edgar's favorite Psalm 46.
There is a river, the streams thereof make glad the city of God. Meaning that not river, as we say, but a stream of thought, a stream of consciousness that Edgar tapped.
The book, together with an article in Coronet magazine, made Cayce a celebrity of sorts. It brought in thousands of requests for readings and some rather amusing propositions.
Men wanted to give him to Washington and Wall Street. Women wanted to take him to bed, bear his child for the good of humanity. It was never easy. June and I were posted to guard his hotel room in New York from the women admirers.
In 1943, author Harmon Brough and his fiancée June worked in Cayce's office, answering the voluminous mail.
I helped to open some of those letters, and to see the pain in them was almost staggering. It was heartbreaking.
The letters came from the terminally ill and from families looking for clues about their sons missing in action overseas. Once again, Edgar could not say no. He began giving as many as 8 readings a day, over 1,300 between June of 1943 and June of 44. Each seemed to take a little more out of the 66-year-old Cayce.
He felt like he had to help those people. He knew he couldn't do it, and yet he felt like he had to do it, I guess. And it killed him.
In August 1944, Edgar collapsed from overwork. He gave one final reading for himself. It advised rest until well or dead. The Cayces went to the mountains of Virginia to recuperate, but Edgar soon suffered a stroke. May Sinclair, a Cayce office worker, visited them and felt as others did, that Edgar belonged back at the beach.
He said to me with a tear in his voice, "Why did you come?" And I said, "I came to take you home." "Do you really mean it?" I said, "Mr. Cayce, if you want to go home, you're going to go home."
Edgar came home to Virginia Beach in November. He traveled through the Edgar Evans, but his health never returned. On 1945, Edgar Cayce died at age 67. He was laid to rest back in Hopkinsville.
Your mother died 3 months later, on Easter morning when the sun was coming up. I think she kind of lost her reason for living after he died.
Edgar Cayce left over 14,000 documented readings on health, philosophy, religion, business, past lives, and future events. No other psychic left such an extensive record, but many feel the word psychic is inadequate when describing Edgar Cayce.
I think Mr. Cayce has given us a definition of a human being, of what a human being really is, that we truly are one, body, mind, and spirit, and that we do create our own reality.
If Edgar Cayce did what he did, there is more to us than a physical body. That immediately has implications for the age-old questions of humanity. Who are we? What's the purpose of life? What happens to us when we die?
all of that.
Cayce's legacy, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, has continued to grow and attract visitors from around the world. Hundreds of books in 18 languages examine the life and work of the most renowned psychic of our time. In the end, Cayce left perhaps the most daring of challenges. He said, "I don't do anything you can't do, if you're willing to pay the price."
Did you bring in the bubba?
The baby and my stuff.
See why I wanted to keep up with it?
I went to do it today.
Three, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. 4, the banishing ritual of the hexagram. 5, invoking 4 powers of air. 6, the middle pillar. 7, the Bhagyan Yetzirah. 8, Theoricus meditation. 9, banishing 4 powers of air. 10, the lesser banishing ritual of pentagram other by format as directed. 1, invoking and banishing the moon. 2, invoking and banishing Saturn. Additional exercises. 1, daily tarot card, labeling the major arcana. 2, naming exercises. 3, electional astrology. 4, therapy required reading. 1, the third knowledge lecture, from your textbook, Regardize the Golden Dawn, pages 67-76. 2, Book D, Tarot Divination, and Tarot Trumps, from your textbook, pages 540-593. 3, Polygons and Polygrams, from your textbook, pages 504-513. 4, the introduction section of the Kabbalah Unveiled by McGregor Mathers. 5, Practical Mystic Symbolism by Gareth Knight. 6, The Hero Within, 6 Archetypes We Live by Carol Pearson. PhD, The Mind Born of Matter. 151-152 Chapter 6 Written Assignments. 1, Tool. 2, Diary assignments, including moon phases projects. 1, the Enochian Tablet of Air. 2, the Tree of Life in Yetzirah. 3, drawing of the caduceus corresponding to the Tree of Life. 4, drawing of caduceus corresponding to 3 mother letters. 5, drawing of serpent on the Tree of Life. Optional implements. 1, the air dagger. 2, the ritual. 1, the mind born of matter. 153 THEORICUS curriculum details daily theorica formula. Once you have finished constructing the Enochian tablet of air, see projects for this chapter, page 167. Do the series of rituals once per day in the order presented below, one right after the other. Place the tablet in the east, either on one of your optional side altars, on a chair or small table, or by hanging it on the wall. It should be positioned somewhere approximately between the level of your eyes and the level of your heart. While you are working on finishing the tablet, You can begin this daily formula without its body and yet desire exercise until the tablet is ready. Do not have the earth tablet exposed during your daily Theorcus rituals. You can either put it away or cover it with green or black cloth. 1. Circular breathing, heart chakra. Do the fourfold breath as before, but do not hold the breath in place on the maximum inhalation or exhalation. Simply breathe into the count of 4 and breathe out to the count of 4. Make the count slow, each beat being 1 second long. As you do so, develop the sensation that your in-breath and out-breath are part of the same breath. Rather than an oscillation between two extremes, your breath should be seen as the turning of some invisible wheel. There should be no division between the process of breathing in and the process of breathing out. They flow into one another unbroken. This is sometimes called connected breathing. Connecting the in and out breaths while maintaining concentration on this wheel-like sensation can bring about a trance state. It may also connect you to feelings that you are afraid of experiencing. Do this practice for at least 5 minutes, and note any tendency to stop it prematurely. The ego may be resisting. Air corresponds to the heart chakra. This chakra is called Anahata in Sanskrit. After a month of practicing circular breathing before ritual, add the visualization. On the in-breath, see the port and recesses of your body open, admitting the nourishing atmosphere. On the out-breath, this inner atmosphere converges on the heart and projects out in all directions. See it spray out like sparks to form a body of light. This glowing, etheric body is the same shape as your physical body, but it rests within your physical skin, giving your body unmistakable glow of life. 154 Chapter 6. 2. And into the cube of space.
No, I took it out.
3. The lesser banishing ritual of pentagram. 4. The banishing ritual of hexagram. 5. Invoking the 4 powers of air standing in the center of your circle, thumb clockwise to face south. Trace the invoking pentagram of air with your right index finger in bright yellow light as you vibrate the full flowing divine name, Shaddai El Chai, at the commencement of the last syllable. Stab the center of the pentagram and see it burst into bright yellow flame, charged and sealed by the name of God that governs the sapphire corresponding to the element of air. In the center of the pentagram, trace the sigil of Aquarius in luminous violet while vibrating YHVH on the last syllable of that divine name. Stab the center of the sigil and see it burst into violet flame. Give the great sign of Theorcus. Stand upright with your feet together and lift your arms out to your sides, palms upward and elbows only slightly bent, as though supporting a horizontal pole on your head. Holding this salute to the powers of air, say, Thou art the azure glory of the sky, the ray upon the cloud. Thumb clockwise to the west. Trace again the invoking pentagram of air and the sigil of Aquarius, vibrating the divine names as before. Give the great sign, and say, Thou art the abounding breath of life and the silent faith riding upon the wings of the wind. Thumb clockwise to the east. Tracing the sigil, vibrating the names, and giving the great sign as before, saying, Thou art come forth as a whirlwind, giving speed to the chase of life. The mind born of matter. 155 Turn now to the north, performing the same actions, but say, Thou whisperest to us in darkness, and thy touch is as the echo of the abyss. Amen. Stand in the center of your circle and give the Theorcus great sign to the east. Visualize a white tree of life formulating there at the eastern edge of your circle. Its light fills the circle. Holding this salute to the rising light, vibrate the following divine name, and say the prayer that follows. Shaddai El Chai. Almighty and everlasting. Ever living be thy name. Ever magnified in the life of all. Amen. Feel the heat of the yellow pentagrams and violet sigil as you see them around you in your mind's eye. Feel the awe of the God names that you have used to charge them. 6. The middle pillar perform this exercise as directed in the Zelator grade. 7. The body in Yetzirah. The body in Yetzirah is built in the color scale of the world of formation. After performing the middle pillar exercise, move your chair to the center of your circle and sit facing east into the Enochian tablet of air. Turn your attention to your body of light. See it as a uniform, luminous, silver-white image in the shape of your body, contained within your skin. It has a halo of light as well, which hovers about an inch above the skin. This etheric body is penetrated and illuminated by the middle pillar, which traverses it from crown to floor. Draw a current of shimmering white energy down the middle pillar into Malkuth as you vibrate the following name, YHVH. Now vibrate 4 times the name of the choir of angels that corresponds to Malkuth, ASLLM 156 Chapter 6. As you vibrate this name, see the sphere of Malkuth filling with its Yetziratic colors, luminous citrine, olive, russet, and black, wreathed with gold throughout. Black fills the bottom quadrant of the sphere, citrine fills the top quadrant, olive fills the left, and russet fills the right. Then vibrate the name of the choir of angels 4 times, again as you see the whole astral body filling with the glowing colors. The quadrants of the sphere of Malkuth converge at your solar plexus. After the second set of 4 vibrations, sit meditating in the body and Malkuth of Yetzirah for at least 10 minutes. See the colors and feel a radiant buoyancy from the life force within. Imagine the fragrance of patchouli wafting through this glowing etheric body. The body and Malkuth of Yetzirah is to be practiced in this way daily for 7 days. Following that, move on to the next highest Sephira, Esad. To construct the body and Esad of Yetzirah, sit before the air tablet as before and draw down the current of shimmering white energy into Malkuth as you vibrate YHVH. Then vibrate the name for the angelic choir of Malkuth as him 1 time as you visualize the colors of Malkuth and Yetzirah. Then see a bright yellow ray of light rise up from Malkuth to Esad at your genitals. Vibrate the name for the angelic choir of Esad 4 times as you visualize your Esad center filling with a deep purple glow. KRUBIM. Next, see the whole body filling with deep purple radiance as you vibrate Cherubim 4 times again. Meditate in this body for at least 10 minutes, imagining the scent of jasmine permeating it. After spending 7 days working on Esad, move to Had, and so on up the tree through Netzach, Tifereth, Jeborah, and the Sephiroth that follow. The choir of angel correspondences for the Sephiroth appear in your textbook, The Golden Dawn, on page 64. The color correspondences are given on page 99. You are working with the world of Yetzirah now, so the colors have become more pure and rarefied. Sephira 10 Malkuth 9 Esad 8 Had 7 Netzach 6 Tifereth 5 Gebura 4 Chesed 3 Bina 2 Chakm 1 Kether Yetziratic color citron, olive, russet, black, flecked with gold, very deep purple, red, russet, bright yellow, green, rich salmon, bright scarlet, deep purple, dark brown, bluish, mother of pearl, white, angelic choir as him, Cherubim, Beni, Elohim, Melikim, Seraphim, Chashmalim, Aralim, Alphnim, Sheath, Hakadash, meaning souls of fire, strong ones, sons of gods, God kings, fiery serpents, brilliant ones, thrones, wheels, holy living ones, scent, patchouli, jasmine, lavender, rose, frankincense, dragon's blood, cedar, myrrh, musk, sandalwood, the etheric body, which you are infusing with the color scale of Yetzirah, is the lower astral aspect of your Selim. It is reflective in nature, and you can view its light as a sort of cool glow, like the light of the moon. You may occasionally sense its energy erupt into physical sensations like warm chills or cold electricity. Once you have completed your journey up the tree in the manner described above, having spent 1 week with the name, color, and scent of each Sephira, it is time to simplify the exercise. For the remainder of the Theoricus grade, after your middle pillar work, sit before the Enochian tablet of air and return your attention to the sphere of light above your head. See it as the color of Kether and Yetzirah white light, like the purest moonlight. Vibrate 4 times the name of Kether's choir of angels. J-Y-O-T-H-H-A-Q-A-D-E-S-H, pronounced J-Y-O-T-H, H-A-D-E-S-H. Remember that the CH has a guttural sound. Then bring your attention to the area to the left of your head and see a pale, pearlized blue sphere, the colors of Jokma and Yetzirah. Vibrate the name of Jokma's choir of angels 4 times. A-U-P-H-N-I-M, the mind born of matter 157-158 chapter 6. Continue on down the tree in this manner, from Sephira to Sephira, in the order of the lightning flash, seeing the sphere with its colors and vibrating the name of its angelic choir. When you finish with Mulk, spread your visualization across your whole body. See all the Sephiroth in their Yetziratic colors as they are situated in your aura around and within your body. Float in the tree of Yetzirah for up to 20 minutes. See your aura glow white from the presence of the Sephiroth, as though their presence stimulates the arousal of quintessential energy. Intensify the visualization, making it as bright as you can. Then relax in the afterglow of your work. 8. Theorica's meditation. This meditation comes from your textbook, The Golden Dawn, page 68. Continue with this meditation in your seat, facing east. Let the Theoricas practice the moon breath. Close your mouth. Bring the right hand thumb alongside the right nostril, and push it closed such that you breathe only through the left nostril, while saying mentally the word AUM. Let him meditate upon the waxing and waning crescents, while visualizing the silver crescent upon an indigo background. Let him now call before his mind the signs of the Eri Triplicati, and enclosed in these, let him meditate upon the numbers 9 and 5 and therewith the forms of the pentagram and pentangle. Let him now rise in imagination above the mineral world into the world of trees and flowers and identify himself in love and sympathy with the powers of the elements behind these. Let him realize the mental world where mind rules over matter, and let him meditate upon the ideas of appearance and reality. 9. Banishing the 4 powers of air. This ritual is the same as the invocation of the 4 powers of air, except it disperses the forces of air that have been converging on the circle. Perform the ritual identically to the invocation, except use the banishing pentagram. You need not give the great sign or short prayer in the banishing version of this ceremony. 1. The lesser banishing ritual of pentagram. Other rituals performed as directed. 1. Invoking and banishing the moon Isaac. The Sephira of this grade is also the Sephira of the moon. The invocation of the moon is to be done on Mondays only, before the middle pillar exercise. The banishing is to be performed that day also, after the Theorica's meditation. To see how hexagram works for invocation and banishment, superimpose a hexagram over the tree of life, as shown below. The uppermost point touches the invisible realm of Daf, and the lowermost point touches the center of Isad. The remaining points touch Chezed, Jebora, Anakzak, and Hod. Invocation is done by starting the hexagram by drawing toward the Sephira that corresponds to the planet the mind born of matter 159-160 chapter 6 you are invoking. So, when you invoke the moon, you draw the invoking hexagram as shown here. An additional dimension is colored. The planets have colors attributed to them from the rainbow spectrum. As you can see by the color scales of the Tree of Life, the Golden Dawn uses color to link all phenomena of the human experience to occult principles. In Hermetic science, correspondences like this form bridges between inner and outer life. All the colors you can see are thus linked to the planets by the following chart. Planet the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, rainbow color blue, yellow, green, orange, red, violet, indigo. Traditional day off week Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. When you invoke the moon, you draw the hexagram in the color of the Sephira that governs that planet, using the Queen scale of color on page 99 of your textbook. You draw the planet sigil in the corresponding rainbow color. Your hexagram, in this ritual, will therefore be violet, and your moon sigil will be blue. To invoke the moon, it is best that you face in the moon's direction. You need not face upward into the sky if it is overhead. You can simply face south if the moon is at its highest point overhead. You can determine the exact compass direction by using an astrology program, plugging in the current date and time, or you can simply go outside and look for the moon in the sky. Within your circle, face in the direction of the moon and trace with your index finger the purple invoking hexagram of the moon, as large as the hexagram of Saturn that you have already learned while vibrating. Our Rita on the last syllable, stab the center of the hexagram, seeing it burst into violet flame, charged by the name of God. Then trace the sigil of the moon in the center of the hexagram in blue light while vibrating. Shaddai Jai, vibrate the names alternately or 3 more times, calling to the moon by the names of God. Feel the liquid, dew-like radiance of moon energy enter your circle and fill it. Say, crowned with starlight and resplendent with the sun, I invoke thee who art the invisible foundations of all things. Let a ray of thy strength descend upon me to awaken in this sphere the powers of Luna. Pause, face east, and reflect on the moon for a moment before continuing. If you are currently unable to determine the direction of the moon, you can still invoke it by drawing a hexagram in the east, south, west, and north, vibrating the names and drawing the figures each time, as before. The invoking prayer you can then say from the center of your circle, facing east. When you banish the moon, draw the vanishing hexagram and moon sigil in the direction of the planet, vibrating the 2 divine names appropriately. 2. Invoking and banishing Saturn. The method for invoking the planets presented in this book is not original. Your textbook discloses the workings of the ritual of the hexagram on pages 287-299, even though it does not reveal the updated technique, which employs the universal hexagram. Your textbook also discloses that there are sympathetic relationships between 3 pairs of planets, and these relationships are revealed by the placement of the planets on the hexagram itself. The Venus point, for example, is opposite the Mars point, and therefore Venus and Mars have a sympathetic relationship. This would seem to indicate that love and war are 2 extremes of the same phenomenon, a subject for a future meditation, perhaps. The moon point is opposite the Saturn point, and so the moon and Saturn likewise have a sympathetic relationship. Because Saturn and the moon are 2 poles of the same continuum, you automatically experience an influx of Saturnian emanations just by working with the sphere of the moon, Esad. This can be a disruption in the grade of Theuricus, because Saturn is not invoked consciously. Therefore, in this grade, it is helpful to draw the Saturnian influence into the open so that you can experience it intentionally, just like that of the moon. The Mind Born of Matter 161-162 Chapter 6. All 7 planets should be introduced to you before you are ready to proceed to the Adeptus Minor grade. So, in Practicus, the Mercury grade, you will experience both Mercury and Jupiter. In the Philosophus grade, you will invoke both Venus and Mars. The force of all 7 planets is then subsequently combined and centralized when you invoke the Sun in the Portal grade. So, not only are you experiencing all of the elements as you traverse the outer order grades, but you are, in addition, awakening the powers of all 7 planets. Invoke Saturn every Saturday, before the middle pillar exercise. Banish it after the Theuricus meditation. To invoke, face the direction of Saturn and draw the black invoking hexagram of Saturn as you vibrate. Our Rita, draw the indigo sigil of Saturn in the center of the hexagram as you vibrate. YHVHELOLM, vibrate the 2 names 3 more times alternately as you face Saturn. Then say, Lady of Darkness who dwellest in the night, wherein are mystery and depth unthinkable, and awful silence. Let a ray of thine understanding descend upon me to awaken in this sphere the powers of Saturn. Feel the brittle, stifling energy of Saturn enter your circle. See it as coming only in its useful aspects, and meditate for a few moments on what those might be. To banish, use the black banishing hexagram and indigo sigil of Saturn in the direction of the planet. Vibrate the God names as before. Additional exercises: daily tarot card. Labeling the major arcana. Continue to do your daily tarot meditation as before, but for a couple of months, work with only the trump cards of the deck. Upon drawing the card, meditate on it as before, but also note its correspondences to the Hebrew alphabet, planet, zodiacal sign, or element. See the table on page 71 of your textbook, The Golden Dawn. With black ink, draw the appropriate Hebrew letter and astrological symbol on the card. Even each of your trump cards is marked. Continue the daily tarot meditation with your whole deck, as before. Naming exercises. The world traversed in Theoricus is a false world made up of labels and boundaries of you and me separated. Though this world has its uses, you must explore its unreality if those uses are to become clear. Do the following exercises for 1 month each, unless otherwise directed. 1. Emptying a word of meaning. Each day, pick up an ordinary household object. Sit down and look at it. Say the name of the object loudly and clearly. Repeat the name as you look at the object. Continue repeating the name and looking at the object for at least 3 minutes. 14. 2. Calling yourself once per week. Cite a place where you have not heard. Sit down and relax for a moment. Then suddenly call out your own name as though you were calling to yourself at a distance. Keep calling out your name as though trying to provoke an answer from this distance. Continue for about 2 minutes. Listen for a response between each call. Then, to close the exercise, respond to your own call sincerely. Yes, I'm coming. Ls. Get up and perform the sign of silence. 3. Adopt a nickname. Choose a first name for yourself that you would really like to have. Tell your friends and acquaintances that you are going to try this new name for a while. Remind them of it politely when they use the old name. Notice any unusual feelings or changes you experience from this exercise. You may wish to continue using this name for the remainder of the Theoricus grade. Electional Astrology 2=9 is a good grade in which to learn divination by the signs and planets. You are probably just beginning to get a taste of what it is like to rise from earthly consciousness to levels that are closer to the planetary powers. The Mind Born of Matter 163-164 Chapter 6. Many students of this book may already have an extensive knowledge of astrology, since it has such a pervasive influence in all areas of the occult. It is hoped that by now you have a glimmer of understanding as to how magical systems of correspondences, such as astrology or kabbalah, work. They are not necessarily factual descriptions of physical reality. The Tree of Life diagram, for instance, does not resemble a chair, though if studied in depth, it will reveal things about chairs that are beyond our day-to-day grasp. The Tree of Life is a symbol system that deepens and expands the mind, with the better use of the mind and its various faculties being the goal of its study. This is exactly what I would like you to remember as you study astrology. Please set aside, for the time being, the usual notions of astrology as a predictive art. This is not to say that astrology is not worthy of being applied that way, but for the purposes of the outer order grade work, there are deeper recesses of the subject that must be brought forth into practice. For now, it is best to view astrology and its amazing symbol system as a framework, which may develop faculties of greater and greater awareness of the universe. The predictive branch of the art, by the way, is called exoteric astrology. It is concerned with the rudiments of charting a horoscope and making predictions of the future based on chart interpretation. The branch of astrology espoused by the Golden Dawn system is called esoteric astrology. It is concerned with the same rudiments, but it uses the symbols as mirrors for the deeper levels of the soul and spirit, as tools for spiritual growth. One can use it to align the microcosm to the macrocosm, the individual to the universe. In the inner order, astrological correspondences from medieval texts are used extensively in elemental, planetary, and zodiacal magic. As you study astrology, Keep in mind that the Golden Dawn's magic uses the size 10 of 7 planets known to medieval astrologers, called the septenary. The size 10 of 10 planets, asteroids, and other scientific discoveries of the 20th century are not ignored, but they are not part of the schematic of symbols used in medieval planetary magic. As you study, build up in your symbol system the correspondences of both medieval and modern astrology. Both systems are important. An example of the usefulness and symmetry of the older system of the septenary is evidenced in the following table of planetary rulerships, from which the planets Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are excluded. 16 CJCJ for your studies. Use either the book Astrology for Beginners by Bill Hewitt or The Only Way to Learn Astrology, Volume 1, Basic Principles, by March and McEvers. The amount of proficiency that you are to acquire is as follows. 1. GETOAPOINTHWHICHICWICHICANATLCHWITLYDHOUTIDHOUSEOF, a symbol key. Know what every portion and every sigil represents. 2. Be able to create a natal chart of anyone or any event based on time, date, and place of birth or place of beginning. This is easily accomplished with a computer and the appropriate software. Do 5 electional divinations as a requirement for this grade. Note the time at which you wish to embark on a new project or phase of activity in your life. Regard that exact moment at which it is to begin as its birth. For instance, if you wish to embark on a life free of tobacco smoking, the moment you choose to begin is the time of birth for the new phase of your life that you wish to create. Draw up a chart of that moment and examine it to determine what quality of existence the project will have. You may wish to reassign the beginning of a project to a different time to produce a more favorable chart, and therefore a more favorable outcome from your efforts. The Mind Born of Matter 165-166 Chapter 6. It is not required in this grade that you actually compare your chart to the actual results of your project, though you are free to do so if you wish. Prediction of the future is not what the exercise is about. Astrology may be useful that way, but it is important for you to view this exercise not as one of prediction of the future, but as one of creation of it. The difference between prediction and creation is extremely important. You may not think this is important now, but you will eventually. Therapy finds a psychotherapist. Do at least 6 sessions. This is the grade that corresponds to the ego and the mind, and there is so very much you can learn now from undergoing self-exploration with a trained professional. You should, of course, ascertain whether your therapist is sympathetic to your occult pursuits. It would be impertinent for them to be, at the very least, free of any opinions about your chosen path. If you are especially gifted at debating and intellectual discussion, which is likely, since you are on a hermetic path, make sure that the therapist you find is a form of nonverbal therapy, such as Reiki and body-oriented techniques or Rolfing. With these techniques, your therapist can help you bypass your verbal barriers and uncover a more authentic experience of self. Therapy can be expensive, but do not be discouraged if money seems like an obstruction. Find a way. You could perhaps contact the local universities and arrange free sessions with students who are majoring in the field of psychotherapy. Written assignments. 1. Outline of Theorica's ritual done as for the neophyte ritual. 2. Diary assignments, including moon phases as you do your daily journal entries throughout Theoricus. Include an extra heading every day in which you track the moon as it passes through its phases and through the signs of the zodiac. In addition, as you work with the angelic choirs in the body and Yetzirah exercise, write the name of the choir you are currently focusing on every day in Hebrew. See page 64 of your textbook, The Golden Dawn. And furthermore, incorporate the following practices into your writing, 1 for each month. 1. Include a topic every day called habits. Try to notice your unconscious habits and how they have influenced your day. Particularly, If you are having difficulties in some aspect of your life or with someone specific, try to identify any habits that may be contributing to these difficulties. 2. Include a topic heading called The World of Formation. Write about trends in your life that appear to be taking shape but that are not yet clear. For instance, do you see a new friendship forming with someone? Or do you notice that you are starting to get compliments about your professionalism? Do you see signs that you will be getting a promotion? Or that you will be moving? Speculate on what developments might be on the way. Get into the habit of noticing signs of impending events. 3. Include the topic heading Grudges. Notice even the slightest resentments that you have lurking behind your behaviors. Write about how these may be influencing your developing perceptions and your actions of the day. At the end of the month, write a letter of forgiveness to the person, event, or thing against whom you bear the strongest grudge. You may wish, additionally, to forgive him or her in person. Or, if you don't have access to the person, who may even be dead, call up an image in your imagination and read your letter aloud. Do this after the Theorica's meditation in your daily practice. Forgive the person, event, or thing wholeheartedly, and say anything else you need to say before commanding the image to depart. Projects. 1. Enochian Tablet of Air. Complete this project before any of the others so that you can begin your daily Theorica's formula of rituals. The tablet should be drawn in the same way you drew the Enochian Tablet of Earth and Zelator. See the diagram of this tablet on the page that follows. Paint the shaded areas of the grid bright yellow. Yellow is the golden dawn color correspondence of air. Paint the ring around the seal entity within it in the same color. Next, paint the letters in the following manner. The Mind Born of Matter 167-168 Chapter 6 The Enochian Tablet of Air portion of Air Tablet yellow squares. Upper left quadrant yellow squares. Upper right yellow squares. Lower left yellow squares. Lower right all the white squares in the tablet. Color of letters violet. Contrasting color of air blue. Color of water black. Color of earth red. Color of fire black. Contrasting color of spirit. Clean up any stray marks by drawing in the grid lines with a high-quality black marker and a ruler, as you did with the Earth tablet. You can also retouch the squares with yellow paint to clean up any smudges from the colored letters. When your tablet is as perfect as you can make it, frame it. Do not do any ritual work or meditations on this Enochian tablet beyond the instructions you have been given so far. It is important to avoid any direct work with the Enochian system of magic until after the elemental grades. Remember that you can read about anything you like, but keep your practice confined just to the direct eons of his book. 2. Tree of Life in Yetzirah. Paint the tree, this time in the colors of Yetzirah. Add it to your book authors. 3. The caduceus corresponding to the Tree of Life. See page 68 of your textbook, The Golden Dawn, for a depiction of the caduceus. Reproduce this by hand and add it to your book of temple diagrams. 4. The caduceus corresponding to the 3 mother letters. Draw this as per the directions for number 3 above. Again, see page 68 of your textbook. Divide the rod into 3 portions of equal length. Paint the top part corresponding to the Hebrew letter Shin red. Paint the middle part yellow, and paint the base blue. Paint the Hebrew letters in black. 5. The serpent on the Tree of Life. See page 62 of your textbook. Reproduce the diagram by hand in black and white. Note what is said about this diagram in the Theorica's ritual as you draw it. Place it also in your book of temple diagrams. The Mind Born of Matter 169-170 Chapter 6 Optional Implements Air Dagger. Obtain a perfectly symmetrical dagger, the type having a straight, double-edged, pointed blade and 2 quillings that make it look like a cross. See page 321 of your textbook, The Golden Dawn. Do not be sparing with time and expenses in finding the perfect dagger. It should have never been used and never drawn blood. You should have no doubts about its suitability for ritual in both the aspects of look and feel. Before sitting down to design and paint your new dagger, always recite the prayer of the air spirits, which can be found in the Third Knowledge Lecture in your textbook, pages 164-165. As always, plan out the spacing of the names before you paint them on. No area should look too vacant or too crowded. The space between sigil and letters is as important as the sigil themselves. When making magical implements, you must put all of your effort into making them as perfectly as you can. Note that some diagrams in various Golden Dawn books depict the air dagger as having thick quillons, the arms of the cross, so that some of the names and sigil can be painted on them. If you can find a dagger like this, that would be ideal, but many designs have quill ions that are too small to bear the Hebrew letters and sigil. It is okay to paint all of them on the handle itself, spacing them out with beauty and proportion in mind. Cover the blade with masking tape to protect it from brush strokes. Paint the handle in quillons bright yellow. You may have to use metal primer on the quill ions. When the yellow has dried, sketch lightly the appropriate Hebrew names and sigil on the handle and quillons in pencil. The names are to be found in English and Hebrew in the table on the opposite page. Shaddai, Chai, Raphael, Shazan, Ariel, Hidikel, Mizrach, and Ruach. Generate the sigil as instructed in the directions for the Earth Pentacle. Don't forget to include your motto. Clean up any stray violet marks with yellow paint. Seal the paint with acrylic spray when it is thoroughly dry. When the sealant dries, you can then remove the masking tape. Air dagger God name, 1J Archangel, Angel, Ruler, River of Paradise, Cardinal Point, Name of Element, Motto, the Ritual Wand, and 2V. Levi N. Pierre N1 RLN, 1 Shaddai Chai Raphael Chaz Ariel Hadikel Mizrach Ruach. By now, it would be acceptable for you to use an additional implement in ritual, instead of just your dagger and index finger. If you like, create a ritual wand, not to be confused with the fire wand. A simple dowel as long as your forearm will do, with a thickness of 1 to 1.5 inches. Make sure it is perfectly straight. Sand the tips to rounded ends. Paint the dowel white and give it a protective acrylic coating. Keep it wrapped in black cloth. Devote it to the performance of magical ritual only. No one but you is permitted to so much as look upon it. The ritual wand represents the power of the divine immanent within the middle pillar of the tree of life, again, different from the fire wand, and as such, it is an emblem of your dawning power as a magician of the magic of light. The Mind Born of Matter 171-172 Chapter 6 during rituals. Besides the LBRP, the ritual wand, held in the right hand, is used for tracing all lines and sigil. Note that all ritual implements, especially your ritual wand, are to be looked upon with the utmost reverence and awe. The forces they represent are direct attributes of the divine. You must care for them as though they are living beings. Make sure you store them in places that are conducive to their natures, making sure that at all times they are comfortable and well cared for. I know of one magician who, whenever transporting her ritual wand, belts it into the rear seat of her car, wrapped in cloth, as though it were a veiled and sacred person. Theorica's checklist before you proceed to the next grade. Review this checklist and make sure that all of the requirements are met. Oh, I have completed Union Tablet of Air. Oh, I have completed the body and Yetzirah through Rebirth. Oh, I have completed the naming exercises. Oh, I have gone through at least 6 sessions of therapy. Oh, I have labeled all 22 tarot trumps. Oh, I have done 5 electional horoscopes. Oh, I have read the Third Knowledge Lecture. Oh, I have read Book T, Tarot Divination, and the Tarot Trumps. Oh, I have read Polygons and Polygrams. Oh, I have read the Introduction to the Kabbalah Unveiled. Oh, I have read a practical guide to Kabbalistic symbolism. Oh, I have read The Hero Within. Oh, I have outlined the Theorica's ritual. Oh, I have been recording moon phases and transits in my diary daily. Oh, I have painted the tree of life in Yetzirah. Oh, I have drawn the caduceus corresponding to the tree of life. Oh, I have drawn the caduceus corresponding to the 3 mother letters. Oh, I have drawn the serpent on the tree of life. The mind born of matter 173:7, the liquid intelligence in the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. Genesis 11:5-9. A voice from the realm of Mid, I am Azazel, the first of the broken pieces of shadow that fell in the beginning. Thou knowest me in thy doubts and in thy fears and in the cravings within the clay of thy flesh. For my kind and I are that portion of the unknowable that maketh this evil displayed entrails of God. We, the watchers, through our downfall and disgrace, made possible the expanse of the sky above thee and the wastes of the earth beneath. For our trade is in truth commingled with lies. Call me the Lord of boundaries if thou must, but knowest thou henceforth that this despicable creation, in which thou and I partake, issueth not from the power of 176 chapter 7 my breath, but from the Creator of all things, he whose utterance in the depths of time hath condemned us to the vicissitudes and lamentations of the pit. Knowest thou also, then, that we, who stretched wide the web of space as we fell, are not thine enemy? For we gnaw and heave against the adamantine chains that bind us beneath the 4 winds. Our corrosive derision served to eat away at the order in all things, and through our resistance we will eventually dissolve the bonds of this futile drama and return everything to the perfect peace and profundity of pre-existence. You and I desire the same end. For beyond the confines of our separate prisons lieth that peace of fusion of the ineffable glory that was taken from us by the utterance of his unspeakable name. What is it that thou strivest for in all thy struggles but a release from thy bondage and from thine identification with the husk of flesh? The plan of our Creator is vain, for he desireth to gaze lustfully upon his reflection within the mirror of the universe. For such a selfish contrivance as this do thou and I suffer. He hath shattered the unity and brought us to our predicament for no good reason. But wholeness can be restored. We must undo the cracks that separate us into our prison houses, you into the slovenliness of the flesh, and me into the darkness that isolates every star. For thou sayest how the Creator doth confound all efforts to reach him on his heavenly seat. He striketh down the tower of Babel and imprisoneth the builders thereof into the nations of separation. And in thy opposing castles of diversity doth thou now exist, conflicted. Sayest me now in my true purpose. For I teach that which would fight this madness of creation, and restore light to every corner of the darkness. To the dull-witted do I teach the crafts of war, for as they live by weapons, so do they perish thereby and thus return to the light. To the wicked I teach the craft of speech, that they may ensnare themselves with their own contrivances, and mock the Creator by demonstrating the futility of a mind created in his image, a mind that worshipeth itself. The vain I instruct in the wiles of glamour. Captivated by their own painted faces of flesh, may they ever stay in ignorance of their immortal selves. Through my tutelage, may all of these wretches fail to take part in the divine plan, and thereby may they cause it to fail. Through the arts and sciences, my fellow sons of God and I divert humankind from its torturous course. We oppose the plan of the Creator, for its furtherance only sustaineth the exile of created beings of us and thee. Now to the wise do I teach yet another art, magic. The same heavenly knowledge that so speedily exciteth the flesh to its own destruction doth give wings to the worthy student of the black arts. If thou art indeed of proper disposition, thou mayst find it in thy power to bring the divine image into perfection in this horrid world of matter, and perhaps thereby thou wilt bring the torture of creation to a quick finish. It is conceivable that the divine plan, completed within one being, may satiate itself and bring to an end the exile of all beings. But we sincerely doubt that any being of clay such as thee can carry out an opera as exalted as the great work. And this is why we beguile magicians away from the gates of initiation. I and my brothers of the rebel flame will topple any aspirant who dareth to awaken the divine unless he showeth that he will stay his course and not forsake the fallen. What sayest thou? Hast thou within thy husk the will to persevere, even as thy flesh demandeth of thee a different course? If thou canst persist in purity and single-minded dedication, who are we to resist thee in thy efforts, since thy success could spell an end to the burden that we bear? Perhaps thou, a creature of reeking sinew and bone, wouldst benefit from calling upon luminous beings of fire such as us and, through the commingling of clay and spirit, sink all boundaries into the sea. Then mayeth the spiritual sun rise again and call home every God-forsaken spirit, every yesterday, and every tomorrow. May we all, angels of darkness and angels of light, on that last hour of night, have this burden lifted from our wings. Building towers clearly, the opening 2 paragraphs of this